Let's see, we're all here. John, Jeff is there. Missing Sarah still. She'll probably be here shortly. There she is. Okay, organizing my screen layout here. Oh, and switching agendas. Okay, welcome everybody. It is 7:02 to the open portion of tonight's town council meeting. Since we disconnected the call and reconnected the call, Sharon, could you please take roll call again?
Yes, Councilmember Alves.
Here.
Councilmember Wernikoff.
Here.
Councilmember Richards.
Here.
Vice Mayor Hughes.
Here.
Mayor Derwin.
Mayor Derwin being absent, I will be chairing tonight's meeting. And before we get started with our agenda, we have now our time for oral communications. If there is any member of the public who would like to speak to us on any subject that is not on tonight's agenda, then you may do so now by raising your hand. And you'll be given 3 minutes each to speak to us. If you have a comment on the consent agenda or any other item on tonight's agenda, please hold those comments until we get to each agenda item. And I do not see any hands going up. Oh, there's one from Greg. Whoops, did we lose Sharon? Oh, no, there's Sharon. Oh, there's Greg. Okay, good.
Okay. Is my mic working?
Yes, we can hear you.
Hi, Greg Franklin, Applewood Lane. Look, I noticed you had an item on the agenda tonight related to parking issues associated, I guess, with Windy Hill. And so I wanted to find out whether a similar exercise, I'm sure you've dealt with parking at the Alpine Inn over the last couple of years, given the situation. So is it possible to get a debriefing on where the town council is on, a pretty, undesirable parking situation at the Alpine Inn, which many of us have been living with for a couple of years and I'm sure very familiar with.
The oral communication section, and it's the appropriate time for you to ask that question, is for items not on our agenda. And because it's not agendized, we can't speak to it directly tonight. But what I can tell you, Greg, is that we've been discussing this pretty regularly at our bicycle, pedestrian, traffic safety meetings, including the last one, and likely future meetings as well. It will come up. And that is probably the best venue for addressing any comments or thoughts or hearing updates as we work through that.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I see two other members of the public have raised their hand. Dana. Dana, I think you need to unmute.
Need my script back.
Yep.
Hi, you guys.
Hi.
I was signed up for the meeting tomorrow, but I need to tell you that I object to the format and process of tomorrow's housing element meeting. I feel frustrated, upset that the residents were not notified until today, that we once again will not know who's in the meeting, but beyond that, we will not have the ability to hear others' comments, fears, and worries about our own general plan. Breakout sessions with non-resident facilitators is not the way for concerned residents to be able to give feedback with their own community and then through filters. I personally do not want a facilitator speaking on my behalf about my general plan. I don't like being managed when I have 30 years of important feedback to provide. Our general plan was carefully crafted, internally consistent, and consistently applied in developing and using the implementing ordinances, zoning, site development, subdivision. We need to carefully, very carefully, not to impact any of these provisions that support the ordinances and how they were applied. Any change to the plan needs to respect that history and the key provisions in the document and not cause any inconsistencies that could leave the town vulnerable. Updating to the housing element would set the framework for changes to the general plan. And if that housing element is adopted prior to changing the plan, then you potentially have inconsistencies in the document. Essentially, that would be tail wagging the dog and raise concern over consistencies with state planning law. The basic concepts and objectives for any changes to the general plan should be developed through an open, not closed, public process that the community has input to, and that objectives document should be approved by the Planning Commission and Council after public input, and then serve as a guide as we proceed to consider actual revisions to the general plan and any update to the housing element. We need to have a solid pathways document that lets everyone know where the people agree that they want to go, and then use that as a measure to ensure any changes. This is a town effort and not something that should be driven by a particular vision of staff or consultants. I think the town should look at possibly hiring Tom Vlasic as an emeritus planner to come and work with the residents of the town so we can work together on any changes to our general plan. Several working meetings with him would help quell resident concerns and make us feel that we are actually being heard. Thank you.
Thank you, Dana. I see Liz Babb has her hand up. Liz.
Hi, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, great. I commend the town council for working towards creating a hybrid meeting where people could be in person as well as on Zoom. And I know you need to install equipment. And I was wondering if at some point we could get an update on, or an ETA really, on when you think that's going to be completed.
We have that discussion on our agenda as item 16 this evening. So if you stick around for that.
Okay, I'm so sorry. Very long agenda. I did a search and I missed it. Sorry.
Yes.
I apologize.
Okay, thank you. And I see Christy Corley has her hand up.
Thank you. I have a comment regarding the CAL FIRE maps that come out at the end of 2021. It's projected December of 2021. I'm hoping these maps get adopted by the town of Portola Valley and are taken into consideration prior to decisions on the location of the RENA allocation of 253 units. I think these updated fire maps are extremely important, and I'm hoping that you utilize them in a very good way prior to decisions. My second point is anytime there's revisions of any document or anything, if you could put them in red so the residents know what was changed. I also would love to see, and I don't see it tonight, how many people are attending a meeting. Sometimes Sharon has it next to her name, and we always really appreciate knowing how many people are attending the meeting as we're watching. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Christy. I see no more hands up from the public, but Jeremy, I see you have your hand up. Do you have any comments or responses or plans for responding, etc.?
Thank you so much, Vice Mayor Hughes, members of the council. I wanted to address the comments related to the housing element meeting tomorrow night. The meeting tomorrow night is intended primarily for those who are unfamiliar with the housing element process and to learn more about it. There are 3 distinct housing element meetings this month alone. 2 are related directly to the development of the housing element. It is not a staff or consultant driven process. It is a process driven by residents through a committee that this council chose earlier this year. They met last week, I believe. There will be a joint meeting of the Planning Commission and the council on October 27th to get input from those two bodies. The Housing Element Committee meets on a monthly basis, and it is a great opportunity for people to get detailed analysis of the work that they're doing and provide commentary that all can hear. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Oh, and I noticed we're not using the timer. Is that working tonight, Sharon? You're on mute.
It says it's joined. I believe it's available. I don't know why I'm not seeing it right now.
Okay, I see a schoolhouse that's called Blue Sky Timer. I don't know if that's where the timer would appear.
That's it.
Okay, so for future commenters, we might be able to turn that on.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Okay, with that, I see no more hands from the public still, so we move on to our consent agenda. The consent agenda is a set of items voted on once by the body. We have a lot of items on tonight's consent agenda. Members of the public may speak to any or all items on the consent agenda for 3 minutes each. And if anybody would like to do so, please raise your hand now. And I see Rita Gomez has her hand up.
Yeah, thank you for taking my comment. On number 4, recommendation by the town manager concerning flexible work schedule. I know it's something the public is not usually part of, the staff schedules. I worked for a large software company, and one of the issues that we had when we ran out of space and needed people to work from home was liability issues. And I see something like this, and right away, I'm concerned about what would be the town's liability. So I'm wondering if this particular item could be taken off the consent calendar. I know you don't discuss it here, but if it can be part of the regular agenda, so that we, the public, would be paying for any extra liability, if that could be put on as an agenda item instead of a consent agenda item. Thank you.
Thank you. So the way the consent calendar works is that any member of the council can pull any item to discuss it if they want. So if any member wants to, when the time comes, they may do so. I see a hand up from Pete Chargin. I'm not sure how you pronounce your last name, Pete. Good evening.
Good evening. Thanks. It's Chargin. There is an item number 11, adoption of the resolution confirming the state of emergency. I wonder if there's any information on when that state is hoped to end. And if you can make any comments on that. There doesn't seem to be any information on when we would go back to a quote normal type of meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. I think the town attorney's report in there does include an analysis of what state needs to exist. So I think that state would cease to exist when the conditions are no longer met, but it needs to be reviewed every 30 days. So again, if a council member wishes to pull that, they'll be able to do so to discuss it in more detail. I see no other hands up from the public, so I'll bring it back to the council. Does any member of the council wish to pull an item from the agenda? John.
Yeah, I'd like to pull item 10. Jeff, you probably want to weigh in on this. I had a call from one of the members of the Wildfire Preparedness Committee, and they were concerned that they didn't feel that the amendments to the charter had been debated and voted on by the entire committee.
Okay, so we'll pull item 10. Any other items anybody would wish to pull? No. Is there a motion?
Move to approve consent items 1 through 9 and 11 through 13.
Second. John, moved by Jeff. Sharon, could you call the roll, please?
Councilmember Alves.
Aye.
Councilmember Wernicott.
Aye.
Councilmember Richards.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Hughes.
Aye. Okay, so the agenda is approved, consent agenda is approved 4-0. Item 10, John.
Yeah, as I mentioned, I did have a call from one of the members of the committee who was concerned that the charter had not been reviewed by the entire committee. Having not been a part of that committee, I'm not privy to what things went on and how it was handled, but there was some concern there, so I told him I'd bring it up, and thought, Jeff, I thought you might be able to weigh in as well, since you're.
Yeah, I'm not sure who said that. Jeremy, correct me if I'm wrong. We did actually go over this at our last meeting last week, right?
Through the chair, this item was actually on 2 agendas on August 17th, and then I think it was October 5th on February. On August 17th, there was a discussion about the committee status, and that was a direction that would change the charter from an ad hoc to a standing committee. Timing was not of the committee's meetings was not decided at that meeting. And then it was decided at the last meeting when the committee would meet. So that's why this was on, but happy to pull it and take it back to the committee if the member wishes it to.
Yeah, so I just double checked on our meeting on October 5th, item 9 was committee status ad hoc to standing committee. And the item before that I made is a discussion of date time for those monthly meetings.
So the committee did act on this and reached a decision.
Believe we did. Memory serves, yes.
If there was a step that did not take place, it was that the charter was not brought forward with the dates that had already been approved by the committee. And I understood at least that the committee was directing me to put this charter on.
As best I can recall, I agree. Yes.
Is the only concern the time and date of the meetings, or is there more within the charter that there was concern about?
That's what I was going to ask. There may have been more to it than that. There may have been someone who didn't feel that they had participated in the original drafting. I honestly don't know. Didn't get any more information than that.
They didn't have a specific complaint or about the, okay.
So I mean, they need to have a next meeting. Do we, when are you scheduled to next meet, Jeff? Do you know?
First Tuesdays of the month. So it'll be
as this edit would provide for. So if we make this edit tonight, they can meet on the first Tuesday of next month. And then if they'd like to change to some other time, they can always do that and ask us to revise it again.
I mean, if somebody has an objection and wants to bring it back to the committee to discuss another revision, I think that's probably fine. But I see no reason not to move forward with it now, because it was in fact discussed twice at the committee.
Well, and the rest of the committee will have it on their calendar for first Tuesday
Yes.
next month. So.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So do we have a motion on any further discussion? Oh, sorry. Any public comment on this item? I see Christy Corley has her hand up. Christy.
Yes, if this is really truly a comment from somebody on the committee, I think we should respect someone on the committee. That's my comment. Thank you.
Thank you. And I see Dale Fow has his hand up. Dale. Dale, you need to unmute at your end.
Yes, can you hear me now?
Yep.
Thank you. I'm the vice chair of the Wildfire Committee, and I concur with Jeff and Jeremy. This item was discussed at length. The longest was finding the time for a meeting. I see no reason to send it back to committee. That's just my comment. Thanks.
Thank you, Dale.
And again, the committee could bring it up again if there is some other change to the charter that we're not aware of. So I think that I'm more than happy to hear more input from the committee, but we did in fact discuss this. Yes.
And Jeremy, I see your hand is up.
Sorry, that was from earlier. My apologies.
Okay. In that case, any further council discussion, or does somebody have a motion?
I move to approve item 10, the charter revision for the wildfire, to make the wildfire committee a permanent committee.
Second.
To clarify, the change we're making, it already is a permanent committee. The change we're making is to set the date to be
The-
first Tuesday of every month at 4 p.m.
Correct.
Yes, thank you. Yeah.
I still second.
Sharon, call the roll, please.
Councilmember Alves.
Aye.
Councilmember Wernicott,
Aye.
Councilmember Richards,
Aye.
Vice Mayor Hughes.
Aye. Okay, and with that, we move on to our regular agenda. Item 14 is the first item on the regular agenda, a council discussion of new housing legislation, including SB 9 regarding urban lot splits and SB 10 exempting certain rezonings from environmental review. And let's see, is this Laura's item, Jeremy?
I'm
Kara?
gonna, all three of us are gonna be
All three.
tag teaming on this. You get the cream of the crop. So through the chair, it's good to see everyone tonight. This is an opportunity to, as Vice Mayor Hughes said, discuss primarily SB 9, its potential impacts on the town and some solutions as it relates both to issues around discretionary review and safety issues. This is a very complicated issue. It is a challenge for any local municipality, including ours, to work through dense and nuanced and sometimes contradictory state legislation that comes down the pike. On an average year, 2,500 pieces of legislation are introduced into the legislature. You don't know which ones are going to become law until the governor signs them, which means that analysis for some of these issues comes later than anyone is comfortable with. But I think we have a very good presentation for you tonight. Cara is going to lead much of it, and Laura and I will dip in as necessary. Thank you.
Thank you, Kara. I see you're firing up presentation.
Everyone see the screen?
I can, yes.
So tonight's presentation is going to focus on the state legislature's efforts in the arena of housing. We're going to focus on SB 9 and SB 10 in particular. We are going to preview a solution that the staff has been considering that would regain some of the local control that we believe that SB 9 took away from local agencies. And we will preview the next steps that are required to accomplish that. So in terms of the 2021 legislative season, there were 38 bills relating to housing. The legislature is very active, as you know, in this area. And we think that many of these bills focus on three primary categories. The first category is the removal of barriers that they perceive to that are blocking housing production at the local level. One of the primary barriers that the legislature has addressed in previous bills, and in particular with SB 9, is discretionary review that local agencies have over housing projects. The bills also focus on floor area ratio, FAR limits that many local agencies have built into their zoning codes. We see that addressed in SB 478. Also, a theme is the removal of CEQA review, which the legislature sees as delaying housing projects. We see that in SB 9 and SB 10. We've also seen it in the ADU legislation. And then finally, the legislature this season has adopted a couple of bills, AB 571 and 602, that attempt to further regulate the imposition by local agencies of development impact fees related to housing projects in particular. One of the other trends that we have seen in previous sessions and which we have talked about in the past and which continues to be a recurrent theme is the legislature's belief that we should transition away from subjective standards in land use and zoning arena to more objective development standards. And then finally, one of the things that has popped up this session that we are watching prospectively is the encouragement of low density housing, and in particular, housing projects of less than 10 units. For some reason, that appears to be a magic number, and we see two bills that address those low density housing projects of less than 10. Those are SB 10 and SB 478. So I want to focus primarily on SB 10, a bill sponsored by Tony Atkins. The intent of SB 9, the intent of SB 9 is to transition from subjective discretionary land use standards to objective standards when local agencies are considering low density housing. And it's important as just a baseline here to understand what an objective standard is. There's a particular definition in SB 9. It's a fairly consistent definition. We've seen it in other legislation. And it says that it defines objective standards to be those that involve no personal or subjective judgment by a public official and are uniformly verifiable by reference to an external and uniform benchmark or criterion available and knowable by both the development applicant or proponent and the public official prior to submittal. So typically objective standards are things like building code standards, things like that are numerically quantified. Also, objective standards need to be published in advance. So they cannot be a catch-all phrase like, and any other relevant factor applicable to the property. They have to be very concrete standards that are knowable by both the applicant and the public and the building and the public official that is implementing those standards. In terms of SB 9, there are two components. The first component has been referred to as the urban lot split. The second component is the ministerial approval authority of up to 2 units on each lot. These two components can be combined. So you can do an urban lot split and you can seek development approval for 2 units on each of those lots for a total of 4 units. In terms of the urban, so I'm going to talk about each one of the 2 components separately, but there is a fair amount of overlap. In terms of the urban lot split criteria, the legislation provides that an applicant can create 2 lots of at least 1,200 square feet. The legislation also permits cities to permit lots of less than 1,200 square feet. I don't think that would be viable in Portola Valley, but I did want to raise it. It is an option for this town council to consider. The lot split must be approximately equal size and no more variance than a 60-40 lot split. So if somebody had a 10-acre property and they applied to split off a 1,200 square foot portion of that property, it would not be eligible under this legislation because it doesn't meet the 60-40 minimum split. The lot split cannot involve the demolition of affordable housing. That's a common theme that we've seen in other housing legislation. The lot that is subject to the split must be zoned as a single-family residential lot. There is not a definition in the particular legislation of what a single-family residential lot is. Typically, it's considered one single family dwelling on a lot, but we have seen with state intervention in the ADU arena that sometimes single family lots actually can accommodate up to 3 units of housing. The lot in question may not be historic. The lot must be within a city that has an urbanized area or an urban cluster. This has a very technical definition, and Portola Valley does qualify as an urban area for purposes of this criteria. The development may not be farmland, wetlands, hazardous site, a very high fire hazard severity zone, which we will get to in the next slide, and some other locational restrictions. The legislature added a requirement that there can be no serial lot splits. That was added later in the legislative session as an amendment. And finally, any lot split under this provision is exempt from CEQA. So I referenced the fire safety exception. For cities, the fire safety exemption exempts properties located in the very high fire severity zone. However, there are 2 exceptions to this exemption. The first exception is that the fire safety exemption does not apply to cities that have not accepted CAL FIRE's fire maps. So at this point, Portola Valley has not accepted the old version of the CAL FIRE fire map, so it would not apply to Portola Valley. When the new fire maps come out, hopefully at the end of the year or the end of next year, if Portola Valley accepts those designated maps, then the fire safety exception would apply to Portola Valley. However, there's a second exception, and that exception relates to developments that comply with Chapter 7A of the Building Code. So because Portola Valley has enacted Chapter 7A town-wide, this exception really kicks out the fire safety exemption. So currently our opinion is that this fire safety exception does not appear to apply in Portola Valley. In terms of the urban lot standards, the town may only impose objective criteria, as I mentioned before, but only to the extent that those standards do not physically preclude the construction of 2 units of at least 800 square feet. Now, this 800 square foot number, you'll recall, is the same number that we saw in the ADU state legislation. Also, any lot splits under this legislation only need to require 1 off-street parking per unit and none if the project is close to transit or car share. Thirdly, the legislation requires no more than 4 feet side and rear setbacks. Again, this is taken from the ADU state legislation. Towns must prohibit non-residential use of new lots that are created under this provision. No right-of-way dedications or off-site improvements may be required by a town, and the owner must sign an affidavit. This affidavit originally was enacted to prevent speculative development, and it requires that the owner intend to live in one of the units for at least 3 years. Unfortunately, the language is that the owner only needs to commit to intending to live there. It does not require the actual living in the units. So it is not as effective as was first envisioned. The second component of SB 9 is the by right approval of 2-unit developments. So this provision is known as the duplex provision. It certainly authorizes the approval of up to 2 units, which would be a duplex. But for Portola Valley's applicability, it also requires the town to permit just one single family unit. So the language is that it requires the approval of up to 2 units, which means 1 or 2 units. What essentially this means is that all single family home development will be subject to objective criteria as required by SB 9 moving forward. The qualifying criteria for the applicability of this component of SB 9 is similar to the urban lot splits. There's one additional criteria, which is that it must not involve the demolition of more than 25% of the walls of the existing dwelling unless the site has been occupied by a tenant in the last 3 years. And this is a typical tenant protection measure that we have seen in other legislation. In terms of standards, again, it's similar to the urban lot split provision. The legislation requires the city to impose only objective criteria to the extent they do not physically preclude the construction of 2 units of at least 800 square feet, and we must allow at least 4-foot setbacks. Again, that language mirrors ADU legislation. Finally, no setbacks are required for existing structures or structures constructed in the same location, provided that the structure keeps all of the existing dimensions. In terms of the grounds for denial, a local agency must make 2 findings in order to deny either an urban lot split or the 2-unit development. The first finding is that the project would have a specific adverse impact on public health and safety or the physical environment. Now, in other legislation, we have seen courts interpret this language to mean that these impacts must be objective criteria. It can't be just a vague reference to a general plan policy that is subjective. You have to point to some objective standard. And then the second finding is that there is no feasible satisfactory mitigation for these types of impacts. Now, before turning to staff solutions on SB 9 and ways to address it, I wanted to just briefly go over SB 10, which is another piece of legislation that was enacted this season. SB 10 was sponsored by Senator Wiener. It allows and authorizes town councils to adopt an ordinance to upzone a parcel for up to 10 units if the parcel is located in a transit-rich area or an urban infill site. Now, the difference between this legislation and SB 9 is that this is just an authorization. It's not a mandate. So the council does not have to upzone any property. So far, the local agency continues to exercise that authority on their own, and the legislature is not at this point requiring the town to upzone any property. If the council were to decide to upzone particular pieces of property in accordance with this new authorization, the ordinance would be exempt from CEQA. If the parcels are located in a very high fire severity zone, they would be exempt from this authorization, but this language has the same carve out that is contained in SB 9, which essentially nullifies this exception. It does not apply to open space or parks that are protected by a local initiative. And the council must make a finding that the ordinance affirmatively furthers fair housing, and that is the intent behind enacting the ordinance. So with that, I would like to turn it over to the planning and building director to discuss a proposal that we have to address SB 9.
Before we do that, Cara, I'd just like to offer council members an opportunity to ask any questions, if they have any questions about your presentation. Sarah? Muted.
Whoops, sorry. Do you mind going back to the first SB 9 slide? It was the one that described the square footage. Is that it was 1,200? Yeah,
right here.
They create the urban spot. Could you describe that first bullet a little bit to clarify? I'm confused on that.
Sure. So the lot split can only divide a property in two. You can't have three separate lots. And each of the two lots have to be at least 1,200 square feet.
Okay.
So if you have a 2,400 square foot parcel, you can easily divide it into, two, and that will be 1,200 square feet. You cannot, or said another way, you cannot use the urban lot split for any parcels less than 2,400 square feet.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions, Sarah?
No, thank you for clarifying that.
Jeff?
Yeah, in the report, I was a little confused about the sort of the ministerial approval of a single family residence, because it said, one hand you were saying that it might eliminate our discretionary approval, but then it also said that it basically allowed for ministerial approval of a single family residence up to 800 square feet.
Yes.
So if somebody just comes in and wants an 800 square foot residence, we have to approve that ministerially. But if they want it, we could have we should have objective conditions such that if they want anything larger than 800 square feet, they would have to go through a discretionary review. Is that part of is that where we're headed?
You anticipated where we were going with this.
Okay.
So Laura will get into that more in detail.
Yeah, the language in the report was kind of contradictory at one point. So okay. You can go ahead. I won't belabor that point. Sorry, I'm just checking to see if there's one other. I feel like I had one other question that came up as I was reading the report. Forgive me.
Jeff, we'll have more opportunity for further questions. I just wanted if there's anything on this presentation specifically. So if you can find it, you can ask later.
That's fine.
Okay. I have one clarification to what Jeff just asked about the 800 square foot thing. If we do nothing before January 1st, my understanding is under SB 9, any single family residence application, even if it's 10,000 square feet, would have to be approved ministerially with objective rules. Is that correct?
That's exactly right. And that's very similar to the way the ADU legislation was implemented.
Yeah. So an application coming in January 2nd, unless we do something, an application January 2nd for a typical Portola Valley house that we see all the time would no longer be able to go to the Planning Commission and Ascc unless we do something before January 1st.
That's correct. And that's why SB 9 would have a particular impact on Portola Valley, we believe, given the fact that most of our single family homes undergo a very rigorous discretionary review process and design review process.
Okay, thank you. John, do you have any questions?
No, not at this time.
Okay, I have a couple. Could you go to the urban lot split thing where you're talking about fire severity hazard? I think it's the next slide, that one. For the lot split, what does it mean for developments complying with Chapter 7A? Does that mean existing units on the site at the time of the split have to comply with 7A? Or have to have been built in compliance with 7A? Because you can do a lot split without a development, so.
Right, that's a good question. There might possibly be some elements of 7A that perhaps apply to
The landscaping as opposed to.
streets or,
Yeah,
but you're right. It more typically it would apply to the construction of the homes and the approval.
okay,
of
but
the
in any
homes.
case, under our current code, because we've adopted 7A, regardless of where there are high fire severity zones, regardless of whether we've adopted CAL FIRE's maps or we have our own Moritz maps, everything built in Portola Valley from today forward is compliant with 7A. And so this exemption would essentially not apply unless it's talking about existing things. In order to get the lot split, your existing building on the site has to be 7A compliant. That's why I'm.
Oh, that could be a possibility. I will tell you this language is very confusing. We have been in discussions with the fire district as to their understanding of this language. It's not language that has been used in other legislation.
Mhm.
So we are all learning as we go along on this. And there are certain scenarios that we have not yet thought through. And that is a good point about existing structures that do not currently comply with 7A. If there is one on the parcel, that may be a ground for, applying the exception.
Yeah, because I'm picturing a potential situation where you have a large lot, you have a house on it, you split the lot and you sell your backyard off and you keep your house and you continue living in it on a smaller piece of land. That existing house might not be 7A compliant. Anything built on that new lot would have to be 7A compliant, but you would end up potentially with two houses, one that is compliant, one that's not, in fairly close proximity.
Yes, that
And
very
this
well
may be
could
about
fall under
that.
it. Yes.
Okay. And then next question I had is similarly, there's a setback requirement on lot splits. And again, I don't know what that means. Is that unless it's applying to existing buildings on the lot? Like if you split that hypothetical lot I just described, that you could draw the new lot line 7 or 4 feet from the existing building. Is that what that means?
It is. And this anticipates that there will be existing structures on the property during the lot split. So you could draw that, you could separate a lot
4
right
feet from
along
existing
the
house.
border of an existing structure.
Okay. And then on the affidavit that the owner has to sign saying that they intend to live there for 3 years, what's the penalty there? Is there anything in there about what if you perjure yourself when you sign the affidavit and you have no intention of living there? What's the downside?
The legislation doesn't talk about.
So the town could, maybe you could be charged with perjury or something, but you're not going to be able to reverse the lot split or the development that was built there.
No, it's unlikely.
Okay. And then the no feasible mitigation thing for findings that the local, that one. How do you prove a negative? How do you prove that there is no feasible satisfactory mitigation? Is it that the applicant hasn't proposed one? Is that the criterion, or is that not how it's written?
Yeah, certainly if someone can reasonably propose a mitigation, then that finding is not.
But does the mitigation
Nothing
have
more.
to be in the application is my question. Could you say, well, there's a feasible one, I just didn't do it?
Yeah. That's an implementing question. Yeah, we could probably.
Okay. Those were my questions for the presentation. Thank you. Let's move on to.
Craig, I remembered the
Oh,
question
you
I
have
wanted
two,
to
I
ask.
see
which
two
was-
hands up. Okay, Jeff, yes. And I
Sorry.
see John does too.
Sorry, the one I forgot had to do with that 3-year clause as well. If you subdivide a lot and then say that you sold that lot, does and the person who buys the lot from you wanted to buy a duplex, does the owner have to sign something saying they're going to live in one of those two units for 3 years also?
No. Originally, when the law was discussed, that I think that the general understanding was that the owner needed to live in one of the units for 3 years. That was the general understanding by the public. But
Right.
when the law got codified, we see this much more watered down affidavit requirement that only applies to an initial intent.
Yeah. Okay. And then the other, you can't demolish a house if there's been a tenant in it in the last 3 years. But if it's been sitting empty for 20 years and someone comes in and buys it, then there's nothing to stop. Someone could come and buy a house that's been sitting empty for 20 years and build a duplex. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, as long as there aren't any other.
As long as it was never
conditions.
rented in those last
Or a
3
building
years.
that was occupied by the owner.
Right.
John, you lowered your hand.
No, I've still got, yeah, just wanted to add another complicating factor to the question you posted about setbacks and existing structures. I can see a situation where it would also be possible you might have an existing non-conforming building right up against the property line. You could do a lot split and have big setbacks around the new building, but not have to change the non-conforming structure. I think there is also some language about not having to bring existing structures up to code in other ways under this new ordinance.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Yes,
Another
and there is a particular provision that says that the agency does not have to require improve or require that the building be brought up to other zoning code standards.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I think there are cases like that that would be applicable in town potentially.
Mhm. Okay, thank you. If there are no other council questions, then we'll move on to Laura.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Laura Russell, Planning and Building Director. So staff proposal to try to preserve some of the local control. So our fundamental assumption in this proposal is that discretionary review of large single-family homes by our ASCC is an important part of the town's process, the town's values, and helps to ensure appropriate development. So from the general plan, we know that houses should complement the natural environment and be subordinate to the natural environment. And importantly, we have physical conditions that we address on a case-by-case basis. Topography, fire safety, geologic conditions, and grading quantities all vary by site. So it has become very important, not just for aesthetics and for quality of life, but for safety, for other considerations, to have this case-by-case review of single-family homes. So we're looking at the application of the state law and trying to apply that to our context. And so we wanted to think about the intent of that. And so as we understand it, the law intends to increase housing production in general. So that's the sheer number of units. We think it also tries to encourage smaller units that are more affordable just due to their size. It also represents a further move towards ministerial review. So this is a reduction in the regulations and the time frame that come with ministerial review. You're taking away some of those regulatory barriers. We're also going with ministerial review in the direction of more things being exempt from CEQA, the California Environmental Quality Act. So for years, there was a lot of interest in revising CEQA itself. to be less of a barrier to housing projects. So some of that legislation passed, but more recently, in recent years, the legislature has gone in the other direction of making more projects ministerial so that CEQA doesn't apply. So we think the intent was not really to address large individual single-family homes on large lots in this type of context, where there's so many variables that are really in play. It's a very general statewide perspective and approach to this type of regulation. So it makes more sense to us in more of a typical suburban context, maybe where there's grid patterns or traditional subdivisions that have standard shaped lots, limited or no topography, and without fire safety issues. So we have a possible approach to preserve discretionary review. So the intent again is around saving that discretionary review for the large single family homes so that the town can continue to consider them in their specific context and on a case-by-case basis. So the idea is to create regulations that would allow 2 units of up to 800 square feet each on each lot in all of the single family zoning districts. So that is the majority of the town. Also with that, to create objective standards to regulate things like the building envelope and the exterior materials to improve fire safety of those units and to regulate the things that we can. So those units would be subject to a ministerial process. So this is the direction that Councilmember Alves was talking about when he was posing his question. So we think that this would meet that state law intent of allowing 2 units on properties that are small and would have a ministerial review that would be streamlined and subject to objective standards. We propose that we maintain the current requirements for projects that don't fall under that category. So if there's 1 or 2 units that are greater than 800 square feet each, then those would be subject to the town's normal discretionary review process. So we are not, as many aspects of this law, we are not 100% sure how all of this is going to play out. We're making our best interpretations based on what our reading of the law is and what we've been talking to our colleagues about. So there are certainly aspects of this that we continue to work out, but we do think that this approach is at least worth considering to preserve that discretionary review and the case-by-case review of the projects that has been really important to the community. So over to Jeremy now.
Thank you very much. So we'd really like to hear from you tonight around the issues and suggestions that staff has made in these 3 areas to act on urban lot splits and adoption of some process. We think that the best path is an urgency ordinance that we could bring back to the council by its December 8th meeting. It would be December 8th. That would allow us to preserve the town's discretionary review process and also have these objective criteria for what Laura just described. We also think it's important that this conversation be, the germane portions be inserted into the housing element update process that's underway right now. So I'll stop right there and happy to take any questions on this portion of the presentation. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Laura and Jeremy. Council members, do you have any questions on Laura's proposal? Sarah? Oh, John, your hand is up.
Yeah, Laura, you're sorry, am I on?
Yes.
Laura, your presentation, you didn't specifically identify the issue of lot splits. I assume that's intentional, or is that how would that work into the language of the new ordinance?
We think that the lot split language in the law is fairly straightforward, and we would just have to codify that. We don't see any options that are apparent to us in our reading of it that would allow us to keep any other local control over that. But there, we did learn a lot through the recent ADU updates related to incentives. So, there may be ideas around incentives that we could build into both lot splits and the 2-unit portion of SB 9 to encourage the type of development that we would want to see. But there's a tremendous amount of complexity in trying to bring all those elements together.
Yeah. Thank you.
Sarah, do you have a question?
I don't have a question right
No.
now.
Jeff?
None right now, no.
Okay. I have two questions. Under this proposal, what would happen in the fairly common circumstance that we have in Portola Valley today if somebody were to come in and apply for one housing unit on a site that exceeds 800 square feet and one that is lower than 800 square feet? Would the small one, would we guide people towards our ADU process for that? Would, if they chose to, could they have the small one reviewed under our SB9 small building process? The large one presumably would go through the subjective review or the discretionary review process that you're talking about here. But for that smaller one in a multi-unit proposal, how would we handle that? Or is that something you would work out?
Generally, it's something that we would work out. We would have to think about how we classify these different units, because an 800 square foot additional unit on a single family home lot is substantially similar to an ADU. And is smaller than oftentimes we allow ADUs in the community. We, as a reminder, we also have cases where the largest lots you can have 2 ADUs already under our code. So we would have to develop the terminology and the process to ensure that ADUs that are required to be ministerial under state law are processed in a ministerial fashion. And then these SB9 units are processed in a ministerial fashion, and then trying to figure out the different rules between them and how they would interplay. So we don't have a specific answer. There's a lot to figure out in the mechanics.
Okay, and then does SB9 make any attempts to integrate itself with the ADU laws that the legislature has passed in the last couple of years? In other words, if you build 2 units under SB9, can you also then have your ADUs also?
So the law does address this somewhat. This is a topic that is up for a lot of interpretation. So we are waiting to hear what other attorneys and planning directors have to say. Right now, our best interpretation is if you do a lot split, you can build 2 units on both of those 2 new lots, and no ADUs would be allowed. So a total of 4 units wherein there was 1 before. And then if you're not doing—
There may have been 3 before, because 1 plus 2 ADUs.
Yes, that's possible. So there's a lot of different combinations, right? So I'm just hitting the kind of the most common one, or the big picture. If you've got a case where you are going under the 2 unit part of the law, you can have, our interpretation is a main house, an 800 square foot SB9 unit, and then an ADU that might range anywhere from very small up to 1,200 or even 1,500 square feet under our current code. And then you could have a 500 square foot junior ADU, but that would have to be internal inside the building envelope of the main house.
Well, there is no main house, right? These are both 2 main houses now if you do an SB9 building. So could you not do that for each of the 2 units? Or they're not, I mean, the two main houses.
So I think that you would have 1 junior ADU that would have to be within one of those 2 main houses.
Okay, got it. So your interpretation, the best understanding is you get 1 JADU and 1 ADU split amongst the 2 new main SB9 houses per lot. Unless it was a split lot under SB9, in which case you don't get any ADUs. It's complicated.
I'm not sure. Yeah, it's complicated, and we're using slightly different language. We're gonna have to get on the whiteboard and draw every scenario that we can imagine, because it starts to get pretty complicated. So you're saying so.
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to understand. So today, in most parts of town, you're allowed to build a house, an external ADU, and a JADU today before SB9 under our current code. So I'm trying to understand with SB 9, if you're now allowed to build 2 units of 800 square feet, where currently you're pretty much allowed to do that anywhere in town because you can build a house in a 800 square foot ADU.
I think you're adding one more
unit.
unit
Okay.
to what is currently allowed, but this
Unless
is
you do a lot
exactly,
split, in which case, well, I guess then it's still one more unit because you still
Yeah.
have a total of 4 where you had 3.
but this is the area that we're still working on interpretations, and, you know, looking to consensus, amongst our colleagues, but that's our best interpretation as of now.
Okay. And
If I could, another synchronization issue between ADU law and SB 9 that still needs to be worked out is the ownership models. So ADU law says that an ADU may not be separately sold unless you go through this, you know, Habitat for Humanity. There's a specific exception for that, but it can't be sold. However, under SB 9, you can separately sell one of these units, either as a duplex and sort of a condominium type of you know, ownership, or as a single family home if you do a lot split. So that is also something that when an applicant is considering which, you know, which proposal to pursue, that would factor into the decision as well. And we would expect that our implementing ordinance would clarify that distinction.
okay. Thank you. And then for the lot splits, I think there still are some things that we would want to put in the lots if we have something to adopt, you know, some implementing legislation for the lot splits that we'd want to consider. For example, if you do a lot split and you're putting your lot line 4 feet from a 30-year-old house that was not built under 7A, we might want to impose conditions or other restrictions if it were possible. And I'm thinking about the, you know, some version of the carrot and stick approach that we took with the ADUs, where, you know, would it be possible to impose any restrictions on 2 lots once they are subdivided? Could you allow the subdivision to happen, but say any future development on either of those 2 lots would have to go through the discretionary review process and make that part of either the zoning for those 2 new lots, or a special deed restriction on those lots, or some other mechanism for applying controls to a divided lot, to an SB 9 divided lot, which would allow us then to perhaps, you know, manage fire safety and other related issues there. So it's
I
just,
think those are
I guess it was more of a thought than a question,
questions.
but
Yeah.
whether the law allows that mechanism of us imposing restrictions on the lots, or whether it says you have to do a clean lot split and you can't put any conditions on it.
Something we have to consider.
Okay. Jeff, I see your hand is up.
Thank you. Yeah, you reminded me a couple of questions about just that ownership model in general. If you were to build 2 units and sell them separately on one lot, do the owners of both units own the land? Well, and in the long run, like if I buy one of those 2 units, can I then sort of, like, in the extreme case, could I turn around and sort of just like scrape and rebuild that house in a few years if I wanted to? Would it be subject to the same kind of restrictions we're talking about for the initial sale of let's call it a condo? And then my other question is, the state law says you can't allow short-term rentals on either the lots that are divided or on the duplexes, but does that mean a deed restriction for each of them then?
So let me start a little bit, and I think then Kara should definitely continue. I think in terms of the 2 units, there would have to be an appropriate legal instrument or mechanism, like a condominium arrangement. So depending on how those 2 units are arranged on the site, they may be attached, they may be detached. So you may have a situation where there's access easements that are granted between the two parties and they individually own the land, or they may jointly own some part of it and then, do you know what I mean, individually own their units. So there's a couple different legal mechanisms where that would be possible.
Okay.
And Cara, maybe?
Yes, that's correct. You would probably expect to see condominiums in this situation. And then in terms of the short-term rental restriction, the way those are typically enforced is through a deed restriction. So we would have to develop a template and record that with each of these projects.
Okay.
Was there one more question?
Yeah, I see John's hand is up.
Yeah, just had a question or a bit more of a clarification, I think, for people listening, that that to make sure that it's understood that our current restrictions on the use of properties in town that are related to geological conditions and that sort of thing would still be in effect. So you couldn't necessarily split a lot and sell off or build a house on a landslide zone. I mean, those areas would still be in effect, and the restrictions for earthquake setbacks and those sorts of things, as I understand it, would not be affected by SB 9. So I think that's an area that I can see being misunderstood.
Cara, do you want to speak to that?
Yes, but the geological restrictions are still technically in effect. However, the state law would override and require approval of at least an 800 square foot home on these geologically restricted sites. And then what would happen is that the building official would probably not issue the permit because under the health and safety issues that, findings that we had mentioned previously. So we get to the same place, but it is a slightly different analysis under SB 9.
And we would need to establish a process for the building official to make that public safety determination.
Correct.
Okay. Sarah, your hand is up.
Yeah, I guess my question is, it just seems to me that like the ADU ordinance and SB 9 with these 800 square foot units, it seems like very redundant. So is this more of a property owner can pick which route they want to take when they're developing their property? Or, I guess another way to ask the question is, what defines something, categorizes something rather, as an ADU versus one of these 800 square foot units?
Right. So I do think that the ownership is the distinguishing characteristic. And yes, you're right that it's up to the property owner to decide which route to take, whether they want to go through the ADU process or go through this process, assuming that the council does direct us to create this 800 square foot demarcation process that would allow discretionary review above 800 square feet. And so it would be up to the property owner to decide which process to take. And my sense is that that would probably be dependent on whether they want to use the ADU as a rental or whether they want to, condoize the unit.
Okay, thank you. Any more council questions? Okay, Laura, Cara, and Jeremy, are you done with your presentation? Is it time for public comment?
Yes.
Okay, so it is then time for public comment on this issue. I see we've had a couple of hands up for a while and some more going up now. Nan Shostak is first. And we may end up having quite a lot of public. Oh, there it goes. There's the clock. Okay, go ahead, Nan. You've got
Hi,
5
okay.
extra
Can
seconds.
you hear me?
Yes.
Great, thank you. Yeah, so town council members and staff and whoever else is there, I can't see anyone else. I do appreciate the opportunity to comment on SB 9, SB 10. From informal discussions I've had with friends and neighbors, I know lots of Portola Valley residents are really concerned about potentially uncontrolled development in the town. This development that's not under control of the town. I know the subject is complex, and I'd like to discuss just a few important points. Timing. If the town is to have any control over zoning for new development, we do have to have the objective standards supporting our local zoning in place before January 1st, 2022. That's my understanding. So you have to move fast. For SB 10, I very strongly urge you, town council, to opt out of SB 10 so that you can continue to make good decisions for our community, so that you have more control. No one wants 10-unit buildings built on formerly single-family lots without any notice to the neighbors. I guess that's the extreme case, but could happen if you decide to stay under SB 10. You have a choice. For SB 9, we have the ministerial lot splitting. My understanding is that to avoid more than 4 units, 6 units, maybe 8, in place of one house currently on a lot or a house in an ADU, the local ordinance needs to have very carefully crafted language specifying a maximum of 2 units on each split lot, or 4 units total per original lot. So please look at adding this language and see if that's really the case. For public safety, even with SB 9 enacted, with all its restrictions, the town does continue to have the authority and the responsibility to ensure that the public safety isn't compromised by any new development. We really do need to be able to apply the fire safety exception under SB 9. I'm very, very concerned about this. The National Fire Protection Association Standard 1140 sets objective standards for wildland fire protection. This is new, and it's nationwide. So following up on Maritza's 2008 fire hazard report, the town should adopt the relevant sections of this NFPA 1140 and commission a new fire hazard and risk assessment that should incorporate the new Cal fire hazard maps that are due out by the end of the year, and the town can work with the fire protection district. Finally, as a member of the town's Geologic Safety Committee, I would be remiss if I didn't mention geologic safety. This issue was discussed just a few minutes ago. Portola Valley has many lots that, if split, would have an unfavorable geologic condition on the new split. We can't allow new construction on geologically hazardous ground. Okay, thank you for your time.
Thank you, Dan. Next is Dale Fow. Dale?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, thank you very much for your time. A couple of comments. Several months ago, I reached out to 3 members of the council and the town manager asking that SB 9 and SB 10 be discussed and put on the agenda in a council meeting, and it did not happen. Therefore, we're behind the 8 ball. You have less than 60 days to solve this issue. Furthermore, 36% of the towns in California opposed the adoption of SB 9 and SB 10, and this council was completely silent. I find that inexcusable. Back to the safety issue, I am exceedingly concerned about SB 9. As far as I am concerned, SB 9 and wildfire safety are completely incompatible and mutually exclusive. The NFPA 1140 document, which has already been referenced, requires in wildland areas a 30-foot setback and a 30 feet between buildings. And I'm sure you all know, and it's been shown by several studies, that there is no higher correlation to knowing when a building burns down than how close it is to an adjacent building. And this comes out of best practices. And And SB 9 completely abrogates that safety factor. So I'm going to say that you must find a way to get around this ridiculous bill. And maybe it is adoption of NFPA 4140 to completely take us into a fire safe community, because as far as I'm concerned, that is the most pressing issue that we have and has not been completely taken care of in our ordinances to date. Thank you.
Thank you, Dale. Next is Bob Turcott. Go ahead, Bob.
Thank you. Home hardening, vegetation management.
You just cut it. Whoops, he just vanished entirely. There he is. He's back. Bob, you need to unmute again.
Am I on?
You are.
Okay. The approach to wildfire safety that Portola Valley has embraced, home hardening, vegetation management, those are necessary steps, but they're not sufficient. As Dale was alluding to, prudent municipal planning is critical. Poor planning can't be mitigated with home hardening and vegetation management. Indeed, by CAL FIRE's own analysis, home hardening under Chapter 7A building standards would have saved 40% of unhardened homes that were destroyed in recent wildfires, but it would not have prevented the destruction of the other 60%. And in burning, each of those structures greatly intensified the fire and posed an extreme hazard to the lives and property around them. Prudent municipal planning is critical for our safety. Where is it safe to build? In what areas is it unsafe? What structure separation is required? What is our evacuation capacity, and what impact will additional housing have on it? The legislature was careful not to preempt the town council's authority and responsibility for protecting public safety. SB 9 explicitly lays out a framework for the council to exercise this authority. SB 9 calls for an objective, written set of standards against which a development proposal can be compared to determine whether the increased risk is acceptable. The NFPA 1140 Standard for Wildland Fire Protection is the most recent iteration of decades of work by the National Fire Protection Association. It is an objective, science-based set of standards and best practices for development in a high-risk wildland such as ours. The Town Council should adopt NFPA 1140 as the objective written standard against which proposals are judged. It should be implemented and administered by the fire safety professionals at the Woodside Fire Protection District. If the Council doesn't implement the framework outlined in SB 9, there will be no mechanism to exercise its authority and responsibility to protect the health and safety of Portola Valley's residents, which, after all, is a primary reason for the Council's existence. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. Next up is Karen.
Hi, this is Karen Batra of the Wildfire Committee. This is the second time a proposal has been put forward requiring homes that we don't like to be built to be fire safe. But all homes being built should be built with home hardening in mind, not just the few we don't like. 2 years ago, the Town Council approved the Wildfire Committee's recommendation for home hardening to be written in our building code. Now that those recommendations we have recommended 2 years ago are stronger than the aforementioned NFPA codes. The carrot and stick approach should not apply to fire, as all new homes should be built with fire safety. Otherwise, the town is simply not taking fire safety seriously. 2 years has been far too long for the new building code. Please do that now. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. I would make the observation that on our roll, which you can't, I'm not sure if it's published, but we have a roll forward agenda, which is sort of the scheduling out of when what's going to land on our council agenda. And currently the home hardening code is, I believe, scheduled for our December 8th council meeting. So if that is adopted at that meeting, that would be in place for January 1st for, as you say, all building construction in Portola Valley, SB 9 or not. John, I see your hand is up.
Thanks, Craig. I just wanted to point out there's been a fair amount of discussion about 1140 and 1140, and evidently there is a section of 1141 which is rolled into 1140 that it does indeed call for a recommend 30-foot separation between buildings, but it also, in the next section, says that if you have a fire sprinkled building, that the fire sprinklers are installed, that you recommended to have 15 feet. So just something that people should understand as they talk about that particular piece of advice.
Thanks, John. Okay, next up we have a telephone caller number ending in 7562. Go ahead. Oh, you need to, there you go.
Good evening. My name is Caroline Vertonghen. Thank you very much for allowing us to speak. I will not repeat what Nan said. Dale, Bob, and Karen, these are very important issues that we have addressed several times. I only want to add, Laura mentioned something about the importance of Ascc. However, at the last Ascc meeting, there was some confusion, and Town Council Silver reminded residents that PV had adopted a policy that would make Ascc subordinate to the decisions made by the Planning Commission. I mean, I would need some more time to find out when that was adopted, but Ascc and Planning Commission are the two most important commissioners or committees that help residents preserving the general or governing documents. And I hope you will actually abide by these. I would like to have Council Silver explain to the residents what kind of rule was adopted and when this happened. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Next is Rita Gomez.
Hi, thank you for taking my question. I'm kind of a newbie in town. I bought my property in 2009, and so many other people have been here for many, many more years. And it frightens me to hear that CEQA and high fire zone areas are not going to be in consideration of these new builds in this beautiful town. And that just concerns me. But my real question is, you know, there have been some incredible comments tonight, and there have been incredible comments concerning SB 9 and SB 10 by the residents in the past couple of meetings and in different meetings. But where do we and how do we find out what is being followed up in this town? Which committee, which person, who do we send an email to on, there are all these different scenarios that we're talking about, but when we see what's going to be the next step, that's actually going to be what it means to us. You know, if my neighbor were to start doing this process, am I going to then receive a message? Currently, I'm not receiving messages with my 300 feet away from my neighbors when they're doing builds. I really hope something changes so that the residents can find out what is going on with these different processes, because if we're not getting information on our current processes, you know, it makes me afraid that there could be a 10-unit subdivision or condos or 10 ADUs or something right next to my home, and I just see the builders there and parking all along West Ridge. You know, this isn't the town that I bought into in 2009. And it really makes me question, what is the plan for the next 10 years, for the next 20 years in this town? Thank you.
Thank you, Rita. And hopefully through the rest of the discussion tonight, we should have hopefully some answers to those questions. Next up, I see Christy Corley.
Thank you. I've been following the state for SB 9 and 10 for a year. And one house can be demolished, and that one house can turn into 8 units. So I encourage the town council to adopt what you're talking about, an ordinance to limit what could happen with SB 9. So let's just, SB 9 lot splitting allows 2 units on each new split. Your local jurisdiction can allow more. They need to write an ordinance making it clear that only 4 units are allowed on these 2 lots combined. Senator Atkins stated 4 means 4 unless you don't state it. SB 9 allows some local control. We need to make our communities state clearly in those circumstances what they will allow. No more than 2 units on each split. Do not activate SB 10. Objective zoning standards are permitted if they don't preclude the building of 2 800 square foot units on each split. That means as long as you allow 2 800 foot units, you can then apply your local zoning standards, your FAR, your fire zone ordinance, your mansionization ordinances. But we believe your jurisdiction has to state their objective standards. Once those are on the books, the ministerial approvals will take those standards into account. So I urge you to write those objective standards that protect not 8 units on each lot split, or where there is 1 house now could become 8. And please protect our town. The other thing, let's see, I guess I am disappointed that we did not adopt our CAL FIRE maps. I think that was a mistake, and I urge you to adopt them or look into how we can currently still adopt the old maps and really use them. Oh, I have so much more to say, but 3 minutes is not enough, so I think I will write a letter. The 3-year clause, you can also write how you're going to implement the 3-year clause, because I believe that we have to sign something, and if we don't abide by it, it could be a felony. So you have to live in your house for 3 years if you're doing a lot split. Thank you.
Thank you, Christy. And yes, I would recommend you and anybody else who has extended comments to submit those to the council at any time, or contact any council member to talk to them at any time. We're generally very available to do that. These meetings are really to move the business forward as quickly and efficiently as we can, especially on these long agenda items, hence the limits to provide a fair amount of time for everybody to speak. So if you have further comments, please do submit them in written form, either before or after the meeting. They are circulated to all council members. And we had quite a few actually on this item for tonight. Next hand up I see is Dawn Bullard.
Can you hear me?
Go ahead, Don.
You hear me okay? Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, good. I just wanted to clarify to your comment, John, that the 15-foot setback was in the old version of 1140 and FBA 1140. Actually, it was 1141 or 1142. But those have now been combined and brought into one version, the newest version of 1140, and the separation between structures is now 30 feet unless the structure is unsprinklered and taller than 30 feet, then they increase that to 50 feet. That would be the maximum. Just wanted to clarify that.
Thank you, Don.
Thank you.
Next hand up is Liz Babb.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for allowing me to speak. I am more of a newcomer. I win. I got into Portola Valley 2015. So I think I'm the baby here. I don't understand the fire map thing either. I don't understand why we didn't adopt the fire maps in 2008. And I encourage somebody there that's super savvy to figure out how we could maybe get the new ones early or what, because I'm a little confused on that. And also I was confused that, let's say we did get them early, and let's say the entire town is determined to be very high fire hazard zone versus just where I live, Woodside Highlands. Does that mean, and you know, I'll take my answer offline, obviously, but does it mean that it doesn't matter because there's this exemption, and so therefore it wouldn't apply because of the Chapter 7 issues and things? That was confusing. I think it confused a lot of residents. I also hear the clock ticking. You guys got a lot of work to do on this, you know, creating this ninja ordinance to get us out of this. And I'm going to be rooting for you all the way because I moved here for the rural adventure from San Francisco, where I lost my house to fire in 2008. My entire house was completely burned down. Nobody was hurt. But, you know, I want a rural experience, and I am very concerned about fire hazards. So I want a safe rural experience. And the last thing is, there's been some banter thrown about that the town council or the jurisdiction of Portola Valley could opt out in some way of SB 10. So that's also flying around among residents. So I encourage you to address that in some format that we can understand. Those of us that, you know, this is, as you already mentioned, very complicated. Okie doke, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Just briefly, I might comment on the CAL FIRE fire maps that were not adopted. So back 2008 and subsequent years, CAL FIRE put out statewide maps. Both the Woodside Fire Protection District and Portola Valley through something that you may hear about called the Moritz Report. We did our own more detailed maps that really assess local conditions at much finer resolution than CAL FIRE had done. And so we have fire maps. They're just not the CAL FIRE ones. They're modified for local conditions. Sorry to hear about your house that burned down in San Francisco. Let's see, we have a hand up from David Cardinal. Go ahead, David. Oh, not yet. Okay, now.
Sure. Two quick comments. First of all, thanks. I think you guys are doing a great job jumping on top of this. SB 9 is hard to read or understand. I hope you can make the best of it. Second, on the fire maps, I think we have to be careful what we wish for. A lot of people seem to be cheering for the town to be rated extremely high fire danger for zoning reasons, but that's exactly what would cause us to not get homeowners insurance. So I just think everybody has to take into account what they're wishing for. In the meantime, I think you're doing a great job trying to thread a very tricky needle. Thank you.
Thank you, David. I see Don Bullard's hand is still up, I think, from his previous comment, and I see no other members of the public with their hand. You just lowered it. Oh, one just went up. Monica Cheney has raised her hand. Go ahead, Monica.
Hi, everybody. Monica Cheney here. Thanks for the meeting this evening. I have to say, though, it's like I woke up in a bad dream. I'm still so stunned by this legislation. This is I don't know, do we have a general plan anymore when this comes into effect? I recall when I was building my house, you know, we had to deal with things like the light reflectivity index for the color of our house. And, you know, you may or may not like that, but the point being, all of a sudden it's going to be okay to build up to 8 units on the same property. This is sort of mind-boggling that we're relinquishing that level of control over our own community. And I also want to state that I'm a little nervous about this notion that the SB 9 units that we're talking about are going to be controlled at 800 square feet. I'd love a little more explication about that number, because I could see those homes getting built much larger. I think the bottom line is it's also a huge disaster from a fire safety standpoint, obviously. And the capacity of our town just to manage that much infrastructure, whether it's the roads or the exits in terms of emergency exits, our fire stations. I mean, I don't even know if we have the capacity to manage potentially up to 8 times the number of residential units in our town. And I really urge you, with all due respect to our town attorneys, I think this is not just a planning issue. This is something we need to be looking at litigation about. I don't understand how we just sort of should take this. I mean, this is just shocking. I think that the community is not really aware of what the implications of this are. And I think we need to preserve every legal remedy at our disposal, and we should be retaining legal counsel in terms of litigation counsel as soon as possible. This is just, I think, bananas, to be completely blunt. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. I would just briefly add a comment that the proposal we're discussing here tonight is specifically to put together a detailed list of objective requirements like light reflectivity indexes for any SB 9 housing application. So that amongst other things we've discussed also, I believe the report says 4 units, not 8 units per lot. So minor fact difference there. Next hand I see up is Pete Chargan. Go ahead, Pete.
Thanks very much, and thank you to all the members for your hard work here. I would like to re-emphasize the idea that's been spoken about before of creating detailed, verifiable, but totally within our control standards of fire safety for any additional unit, whether it be on a lot split or whatever. So my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, please, is that as long as they are verifiable, we can have the standards that are appropriate for our town and the standards that are appropriate for the fire danger within the town. I think you've heard a lot of concern from people about being able to exit from the town in case of a wildfire. And I'd like to make sure that those concerns be included in the draft, or I'm sorry, in the regulations that you're about to create. Thanks very much. Write them hard, write them, you know, so that we're all safe. That's what we're trying to make sure. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pete. And I see one more hand up, Rebecca Flynn.
Okay, yes. Yes, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, so I wanted to kind of also reflect some of the comments that people have said about establishing standards. And it seems odd that some of the fire safety standards can't be used, but I think one way that we really should incorporate is the reality that quite a few of the homeowners that live particularly on the western hillside are no longer able to even get fire insurance. So to me, properties that are unable to get just normal fire insurance it would preclude their being able to be further split. So it seems that, you know, that would definitely qualify under a health and safety finding if the property can no longer get fire insurance except through that emergency California insurance program. So I would encourage you to look into that and possibly include that as well into the standards where areas in town it's just not safe to build additional structures. Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca. And I see no further hands up from the public. Okay, still seeing none. I will bring it back to the council. And Kara, I see you have a hand up.
Yes, if I could, I just wanted to clarify a couple of points that came up in the public discussion. So first of all, there was a question about the ASCC roll-up policy. This was a question that came up at a previous ASCC meeting. This was a policy that was adopted by the town council, and it doesn't abrogate all ASCC decisions to the planning commission. What it says is that for projects that are reviewed both by the ASCC and the planning commission, that the ASCC will make an advisory recommendation to the planning commission on the design issues, and that the planning commission will ultimately rule on all of the design issues. But certainly all of the discretionary criteria and the design guidelines must be followed under that roll-up policy. Second, with respect to the fire map exception, even if the town council were to adopt the fire map that was published by CAL FIRE, our interpretation is that the fire safety exception does not apply to Portola Valley because it exempts, the statute exempts all developments that comply with fire safety mitigation measures promulgated by the building code. So in other words, since the town applies Chapter 7A to all projects in town, that essentially eliminates the ability of the town to take advantage of the fire safety exception. With respect to the fire standard 1140 and the 30 feet, I did want to note that that is a national fire safety standard. It has not yet been adopted by the fire district nor by the town. There is a process for adopting that particular provision. It would have to be initiated by the fire district, the Woodside Fire Protection District, and then ratified by the town council. But as of right now, that particular standard is not legally binding in Portola Valley. And then finally, there was a request for clarification on opting out of SB 10. The statute does not have such an opt-out provision. The point there is that SB 10, unlike SB 9, is not a mandate. It is just the legislature giving local agencies additional authority. The town council does not have to exercise that authority, and we do not anticipate that the town council would, in fact, exercise that authority. So I hope that that clarifies some of the issues. Thank you.
So we are in effect opting out by just never using it.
Exactly.
Thank you. Okay, so we've heard a lot of comment tonight. We had a lot of staff input here, and there's a lot to digest. I guess looking through staff report, I don't think there's a particular suggestion here, but my basic guess is that we want to head towards directing staff to bring us an ordinance potentially, if that's what we want to do, by no later than our December 8th meeting, which is our last meeting that we have scheduled for this year. I mean, we could do an emergency meeting after that if staff needed the extra time, but that in terms of where I'd like to see this conversation go is getting to where we be ready to give staff direction for that. So that said, I am open to council discussion. Anybody want to go first?
I guess,
Right. Go ahead.
yeah, to your point, Craig, about next steps, do you staff feel through this discussion, you have the feedback that like, what would you need to go ahead and develop some language around, an ordinance?
Sure. So I'll start off, and Laura and Carl, please jump in. I think the most basic direction we would like to hear is whether we should be preparing an urgency ordinance. Our assumption is going into this that would be council direction, but we would like to hear that proactively. Secondly, we'd like to understand whether or not the ideas around our design review process as articulated by Laura are a path that you'd like us to include in that urgency ordinance. Third, the discussion that Carl laid out related to some of the safety issues and that you've heard from the public, how you'd like us to approach some of those issues as well. So I hope that helps with the framing a little bit further, just kind of layering from broad to a little more specific.
Yeah, I have a follow-up question to that, which is given the fairly short timeline between now and when we would need to adopt this ordinance in order for it to be effective January 1st. One other thing we might want to think about as a council is whether we wanted to either appoint a subcommittee or have the mayor and vice mayor or something be delegated to work with staff on issues that may come up. We may agendize a check-in on this at a council meeting before the actual ordinance if we have any major questions, but just in the interest of getting something that's as solid as possible before January 1st, we might want to designate a subcommittee or mayor, vice mayor, something like that to work with staff on some of these questions like, well, what if you have one big and one small house? And what if there's a lot line at the 4-foot thing and then you want to set back on the other and the whole thing has a shingle roof? And I mean, there are going to be a lot of these exotic edge cases that probably staff will need to think through and work through, that they may appreciate some guidance from us. So that may be something we want to think through too. Yes, Jeremy.
I would concur with that statement. I think a subcommittee is a great idea. If two council members want me to hate them right now, I could make a suggestion on two council members if that was helpful. I'll let you guys have a conversation a bit, but certainly Vice Mayor Hughes, given the way that your brain was working tonight and the kinds of things that we need to whiteboard, essentially, I would certainly suggest that you participate in that and we can see where the rest of the conversation goes.
Okay, thank you for that vote of confidence. Let's go back to the council. Sarah, did you have any other comments or thoughts or want to start off the discussion here?
No, I mean, I agree. I like the idea of a subcommittee or mayor, vice mayor.
Okay, any broad strokes on where you'd like to see this go in terms of, I think Laura kind of laid out a very broad scheme for, if you opt in to taking your rights under SB 9, you only get 2 under 800 square foot houses maximum. But is there anything in terms of things you've heard tonight, anything else that you'd like us to pay particular attention to?
Well, another thing I'm curious about is, are there things that you guys have considered that you haven't brought up tonight, staff? Like, is there, what options were considered but not proposed that you might think are worthwhile based on the conversation? Go ahead.
I have one that I floated by staff at some point as SB 9 was still in the late stages of drafting and had mostly settled into its final form, which was to just rezone everything to be called not R1, but R1 plus, which is no longer single family residence. It has all of the exact same allowances that we have now. The zoning code itself would not change. What you're allowed to do under the code would not change. We would just call it, because of the fact that every lot is allowed to have a residence and an ADU, it would be R1 plus, which is multifamily, 1 main residence and 1 ADU. And I discussed that with staff and they may give you their input on that, but I think that the 2 800 square foot house is all you get, actually works better and is fits better with how SB 9 is designed. And I think what, as staff pointed out, the intent of the law is, which is to allow more small houses, but not completely remove controls over large mansions. I don't know, Cara, Laura, if you want to, or Jeremy, any other things that you have or any comments that you have on my R1 plus concept, which I've kind of not as much in favor as I used to be of that one.
Or be it for me to say anything about a great proposal from a council member. Maybe I'll leave that for our town attorney, who's also appointed by this council. The yeah, we had a lot of ideas. I mean, we've been talking about this literally for months as we considered, whether or not this bill was actually going to be signed by the governor. As I started the comments up, I mean, one of the challenges that staff always has is, where are you going to spend your limited amount of time on a whole suite of bills that may not even get signed? We have lots of discussions about many bills that don't really end up going anywhere. I think for us, for SB9, this will be a little repetitive, I apologize, but we had two areas that were certainly concerning from a staff level for us, was how we could maximize protection of our valued discretionary review process, and how we could also use this process to incorporate additional fire safety measures as appropriate. So that was integral to everything that we were discussing. I think it's worth reminding too that the home hardening ordinance that's going to be coming up for this body in the next couple months is a pretty significant step, and would capture anything in what would be a preserved discretionary review process that's new or new buildings are remodeled. So we're feeling good about that path. The most recent conversation, this is sort of tongue in cheek, was how can we treat this frankly onerous and difficult and challenging bill, nothing new to us from the state, but as a gift, as a way to actually do some of the things that we really wanted to do, using this as the vehicle to do it. So that was a version of that conversation that we had most recently, and that was really about the fire safety related elements. I don't know, Laura, Cara, you want to get more specific on anything?
No, it's really challenging, and we're waiting to hear if any of our colleagues have any other ideas to bring to the table. So this is our best effort so far after all of the things that we've talked about internally. This is our best suggestion at this time.
I just wanted to add that in any event, I think that at a minimum, we're going to have to come up with some objective standards. The state essentially is mandating that, and that really is the direction and the trend that we have been noticing in other legislation as well. That being said, it's very difficult to anticipate these edge cases and specific lot circumstances. So I think that we may have to have kind of two tiers or tranches of objective standards. The first one will certainly be incorporated into the urgency ordinance if the council moves forward with that. But then I think there will need to be a second allowance of additional objective standards that will come forward from some of the experiences that we have in implementing this ordinance. And there may need to be a procedure for very quickly codifying those standards and getting them published so that they can be binding on subsequent projects.
Through the chair, I would note that having spoken to some of my colleagues in the county, other counties in the Bay Area that are dealing with this, I would say that I don't think we're late to this game at all. I've had conversations with colleagues who are only just recognizing in the last week the challenge of this bill, who are looking in the mirror and saying, "Oh my goodness, the discretionary review in our city may be going away." So I think we're positioned to do something that's very useful very quickly for you based on your input tonight.
Thank you. Yes, and I'd say in conversations that the mayor and vice mayor and town manager and I have had over the last number of months, as all of these various bills have been percolating through. We've had updates in our council meetings and the status of many of them, where we've had some limited discussion of those. But SB 9 and 10 were on the more likely to pass and get signed pathway. And they didn't get signed for a little while just because there was a little bit of an election that I think our governor wanted to wait until after the vote before signing a pile of things. So we have been discussing, and staff has been thinking about and planning for, okay, what would we do? So this is not oh, we only started thinking about this today, or, last week when the staff report was being finalized to go into our packet today. This has been an ongoing process. Yes, John.
Yeah, I'd just like to weigh in. I really appreciate the staff's efforts on this, trying to maintain our discretionary review process at some level. It's clearly, I agree with pretty much everyone who's spoken tonight that this is a pretty difficult thing to have to deal with, and it challenges the town's longstanding processes and standards. So, clearly we need to address it, and I think an urgency ordinance is the right thing to do. So I think we should move ahead with that. I do think we ought to take some comfort in the fact that there are a lot of people here tonight complaining about it. I wouldn't expect that any of them would want to split their lots. So I don't think that it's probably quite as bad as an 8 times multiplication of homes and buildings in Portola Valley, just judging by current attendance here tonight. So I expect it's probably more along the lines of the review done by the Turner Report. And I'm sure there'll be some people who take advantage in order to try to make a little extra money. And I doubt that it will be a really severe impact, but it's certainly something that we need to try to head off as much as we can. So.
Yep. Thank you, John.
Yep.
Jeff.
Thanks. Yeah, I completely support the urgency ordinance, and I think the steps taken to ensure that we maintain our discretionary review, I think does make a lot of sense. It ends up, it's obviously it's very similar to what we did with the ADU, our new ADU ordinance. I completely support that. Thinking about the safety questions, obviously we don't want a ton of new, we don't want a huge expansion of building in town, especially in certain areas. The home hardening ordinance, which we really are anxious to see, I think that's obviously a big step towards this. In the previous housing element, we did, we excluded ADUs, or we did not expand ADU access in certain areas of town, but it wasn't based specifically on fire. It was based around, and this is working with a fire marshal. I'm just thinking of what other safety options we might have. And as I recall, the reason we excluded Woodside Highlands in particular was actually because it had to do with entrance, egress on narrow streets. It was single egress streets that were very narrow. It's certainly worth thinking. This is not something that can go in the urgency ordinance, I don't think, but it's certainly worth considering where in town we might consider, where we might be able to make that objective finding that a lot split or a duplex in a certain area might become a hazard. I'm thinking of just other, just narrow single egress roads, and maybe even other just narrow, just where in particular dangerous conditions. But I realize that that's a little more complicated process. We'd have to make pretty significant findings to start limiting property rights there. So I think that's something to consider for the longer term, and will certainly be discussed as part of the housing element, I know. But for the moment, I would definitely, obviously the urgency ordinance and the steps proposed to maintain the discretionary review. Those are the key things I think between now and December. Thank you.
Jeremy.
Through the chair, perhaps to reiterate, but to maybe more importantly emphasize, the staff's goal is to bring forward a package that maximizes public safety in every way that we can, that we believe will pass muster. Obviously, we're willing to take some level of risk associated with what I think Jeff sort of described there, which is associated with folks who may not like where we've made some proposals on public safety, because they do think it limits some development abilities, but calculated smart risks associated with that. So that's our pledge to the council tonight, is to really ramp that up as much as we possibly can.
Thanks. Yeah, I think we definitely want to create an emergency ordinance here to implement a plan like this. My inclination would be to give as much carrot and as much stick as we can here, and encourage people as much as we can to not opt to have 2 800 square foot houses, but to go through the process that we're all used to for developing in Portola Valley, and essentially for the non 800 square foot or bigger than 800 square foot process to direct people through a process that is as much like our current ASCC and Planning Commission review, with the same rules and the same everything that we've always had, as much as possible. That will obviously, if we approve it in December, include our new home hardening rules, and whatever other fire safety measures we take now or in the future for any development in town. For the 2 800 square foot units, I think there will, just as there were with the ADU ordinance, there are special circumstances there, with 4-foot setbacks and other elements that state law requires us to allow, that may mean that we need an enhanced public safety checklist, or whatever form it has for that objective ministerial review, that if you do want to take that SB9 path, you're welcome to, but you're gonna face a I would say extra aggressive, potentially public safety checklist in order for the findings to be made that your project can be allowed. And you'll always have the option of taking the path of going through the ASCC and Planning Commission process and discussing with them exactly why it is that, because of the materials that you're using or whatever, that you can build within 4 feet of another structure or whatever. And then if you can talk them into it, you can talk them into it. I think, John, to your point of, I don't think a lot of people will do this. I think you're right. A lot of people who are longtime residents and plan to, I forget what the phrase from the affidavit is, intend to continue living in town for a certain number of years, will probably not do this. But if I were moving out of town and planning to sell my property, I might do it to increase the value of the property that I'm selling in a town that I'm not going to be living in anymore anyway. So I do think it is an issue that we need to worry about and pay attention to, because even if it's not a lot of properties that do it in a short time period, it might be exactly the one that we don't want in the worst possible circumstance, that does it in the worst possible way, unless we put some, hopefully fairly thought out rules in place. So I think the emergency ordinance, to make sure that if an application comes in on January 2nd, we're not stuck behind the 8 ball. But I think this is going to be an ongoing process. And I think, Jeremy, you had a slide at the end that says longer term integrating this with our housing element process and, reviewing what happens and revisiting it if necessary. I think, as we saw with the changing ADU law in the last few years, I'm sure SB9 is not the last change the state's going to make. And I'm sure that there will be issues that we didn't necessarily anticipate, where people come in with applications and say, but I want to do this. And how does your process deal with that? And we won't have a checkbox for it. My inclination would be, let's start as absolutely tightly as we possibly think we can get away with. If somebody sues us and says you can't do that, and HCD comes and complains, well, we can revisit it and loosen the rules. And by the time anybody gets to court, we can have fixed the rules and thought through what we want our new process to be. If we find that projects that we think should be allowable are not getting allowed because we went too tight, we can loosen it where it's appropriate. But I think the general direction of minimize what's allowed through this ministerial process and maximize the encouragement for people to choose to go through the ASCC Planning Commission process is the general direction I'd like to see. Okay, any more that staff needs from us in terms of direction, or any further comments from council members? Any thoughts on subcommittee? I think mayor and vice mayor is a sort of nice, easy default subcommittee, but if anybody else of the 3 of you really are eager to take it on, then speak now. Jeff's looking like he's thinking about speaking now. Are you thinking about speaking now, or just wincing and, I see the cat's clawing your leg?
Cat's keeping
Not me, no.
So is that the process we should take? I mean, I think Marianne and I have been discussing it with the town manager on our regular weekly calls, but this would be a sort of more formal, if Laura has a question, just work with us more directly.
If you're okay with that, I mean, Marianne's not here, so if you're okay with that, then sure. The two of you, I mean, mayor, vice mayor, that mean.
That's a turn to me.
Okay, Sarah, sound good?
Yes.
Okay. All right, then with that, Laura, we'll throw it back to you because you didn't have enough work on your plate already. So bring us something back by December 8th.
And a whole host of time off at the end of that. So, right.
Thank you very much
for the holidays, right?
Yeah, this is very useful discussion and really great public comment. So I just wanted to say thank you, everyone, for this really productive conversation.
Yes, thank you. I think it has worked very well tonight. Okay.
Mr. Mayor, Mr. Vice Mayor, I promoted you, sorry. Could we take a 5-minute break?
Yes, that is a good idea. Let's do that. So we will reconvene at 9:17. So there we go. Recording is restarted. The next item on our agenda is item 15, which is a study proposal for BPTS committee parking recommendations on Portola Road and Willowbrook Drive. Howard, is this your item?
Yes, thank you, Vice Mayor and members of the Town Council. I'm Howard Young, the Town's Public Works Director. The item before you is a follow-up to a council direction to return to the Town Council for a study proposal for the BPTS committee parking recommendations on Portola Road and Willowbrook Drive. Just a quick background: at the September 8th Town Council meeting, the BPTS committee chair presented a number of recommendations for parking controls on Portola Road and Willowbrook Drive. In general, the recommendations consisted of red curb, no parking signs, and potentially park off pavement signs. Also in attendance at the time was Paul Krupka, who is also here today to assist in answering questions. He's the town's consultant traffic engineer who has worked on the town's pedestrian safety study, which defines signs and pavement markings that are being installed right now at 9 locations as part of this town's resurfacing project. So those things are underway, and signs, the markings are down already, and the signs are going up later on this week. At the conclusion of that meeting, the Town Council directed staff to work on putting a proposal together for an engineering study and subsequently a design and implementation plan for addressing the traffic and parking issues in the areas identified. So that's a little bit of background. On the discussion part, we understand that time is of essence. Staff understood that. So staff and Krupka Consulting prepared the attached study proposal at the in response to the Town Council. So I do want to point out the study area. I've included 2 maps also on Portola Road. It's approximately 2,700 linear feet of roadway that will be looked at from Stonegate Road to Brookside Drive, and that's on attachment 4. And on Willowbrook, approximately 550 linear feet of roadway on attachment 5. So in addition, I also emailed the memo and the proposal to the chair of the BPTS, Ed Holland, and the secretary, Angela Hay, last Thursday for comment. So in the proposal, Krupka Consulting's, I'm not going to go through the whole entire proposal, but Krupka Consulting will be applying engineering judgment and study to define potential improvements suitable for early improvement and further study for items that need further requiring design prior to implementation. So we put together a short timeline, what we think is a reasonable timeline of 20 working days after approval, and after that, weather permitting, 5 to 10 days for implementation of the easy items On the more difficult items, we'll have to determine through the study what they are and the solutions for the parking on Portola Road, and then also then run those through the Bpts or the Ascc as required. So Paul Krupka is here with us tonight, and I am here to answer any questions that you may have. I do want to point out that the proposal is on a time and materials basis. So there's going to be a mixture of using engineering judgment, a mixture of study, but we had to put some amount in there to allocate funds, since this is not a budgeted item in the current budget. So thank you very much.
Thanks. And Howard, can I just ask, so the product that would come out of this process, if we approve this tonight, would be what? Would it be essentially a plan that you could then hand to a contractor to go out and figure out what to paint and where to put the signs in? Or not to figure out what to paint, but to actually paint it and put the signs in? Or would this be a more preliminary report that says, here are the areas where we need to figure out how to do the drawing of where the sign goes?
And yes, both. So on some of the easier things, Paul will use engineering judgment, such as, red curb and placement of signs. If those are easy items and clear solutions, those are at direction, a field direction that we would do. And then we would implement that with either our own crews or with a contractor. Now, for the latter part, you're correct also. In the parts that a solution needs to be determined specifically on the 2,700 feet on Portola Road, those things need to be studied, and a plan would come back to the council on that. And Paul, feel free to chime in also.
Got it. So without having gone out with a tape, I can't say what it is, but essentially what you're saying is maybe the first 500 feet with engineering judgment, you can say, yeah, obviously it needs to be at least this far, but you don't know if it's 2,400 feet or 2,700 feet or 3,200 feet, and that you need to do a little study. Roughly. I mean, for various different dimensions of this project. Okay, thank you.
Paul, go ahead.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here with you. Councilmember Hughes, to hopefully clarify that the intent is, as Howard put it, is to that I would be able to apply what I know, including code standards and guidance and existing conditions, knowledge of my own from the subcommittee, and essentially look at a situation and say, well, yes, the curb painting on Willowbrook Road is reasonable, Howard, let's do it. That's all I need to do. That's my engineering judgment, because it all fits. And I think that generally speaking, as described in the proposal, the items on Willowbrook probably fall into that category that won't require much action, much study on my part to make a good determination for Howard. The rest of the work done in parallel will require some data collection, some counts, some observations, some detailed review of the Bpts subcommittee's work, and consultation with guidance. And what I would come up with would be a set of findings that say, there are or are not needs here. If there are needs, I will determine a conceptual solution and a conceptual cost. That will require additional time and effort to properly dimension and locate the improvements. So it is a staged piece, but the intent is to, within the first 4 weeks of study, deliver a draft report to Howard that lays all this out, which then we can bring to the Bpts and move it forward as deliberately and expeditiously as possible.
Thank you. And I see that we have Ed Holland, the chair of the committee and the subcommittee member here tonight as well. And I saw you posted some comments earlier in the chat, which are, I think they are recorded, so that will be part of the record already. Do you have any additional, anything else you'd like to say? You might not have known if you were going to be here, but you are. So.
But first comment or first question is, can you all hear me? I'm using a new headset. I'm not sure of it. Okay,
yes,
good. Yes, I would, being an engineer, I would hope that by this point we could be much closer to the engineering design portion of things and much further away from the study, which I think many people, including I speak for the committee without them being present, unfortunately, but would probably agree with me, and many members of the public who have also weighed in on this, to say, we understand the problem, let's just go out and measure the linear feet and see where the signs need to go. So that is my comment also, and perhaps put a little more eloquently in the chat that I submitted earlier. But I didn't know if I'd be able to make it back, because I had to come back into work. So.
Okay, thank you, Ed. Sorry, I just hit my mute button mid-conversation. Are there any questions from the council on this item? Sarah? You're on mute.
Sorry about that. Could someone clarify the difference between the two approaches here? Like where is really the rub in terms of, is it really just that to the Bpts committee, the study seems more robust than what is needed, and they would recommend really just going into execution? Or I guess I'm trying to understand the crux of the issue here.
Paul, maybe you could explain this. My understanding is that it's in your engineering judgment, there are some things you can decide now and some things you can't yet decide and need more information. Is that?
I think that's you captured the essence. So let me just simply put it in my words. And you raise a great question. Generally speaking, the guidance that I follow as a professional traffic engineer and civil engineer is to apply either engineering study or engineering judgment to define a need and therefore a solution. Engineering judgment does not require any documentation. I, as a professional engineer, consider all the necessary factors, and those factors are safety, traffic movements, pedestrian movements, parking movements, all kinds of things, sight distance, sight lines, and the like, accidents and so forth. But I consider all the facts and the guidance and any codes that are required, such as the municipal code, and I can make a decision saying this improvement A from the recommendation is something that I support. In my opinion, it should be implemented. So that requires no more study, no more documentation. The other things do require me to look in the field, to do some observations, do some counts, consider the actual activities, movements, and the like relative to safety, implications on traffic flow. All of this is required because parking, parking controls, parking regulations actually act to control traffic movements. So I need to study, provide analysis, and come up with findings, and those findings would indicate need, possible solutions, possible costs. So, and that needs to be documented in a study. That's the appropriate means to the end there. Councilmember Wernicke, does that
yeah
help? Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And correct me if I'm wrong on this. This is something that came up a few years ago in my neighborhood. When you're talking about, for example, like the parking along Portola and whether it meets the standards, the sort of the design standards. I mean, our adherence to those standards, and I want to say Caltrans, but I think it's something else that you cited in the proposal. I mean, our adherence to those standards is actually a liability protection for us. Is that correct? In other words, if we put something in my neighborhood, it was something that had to do with like speed bumps. If we put too many speed bumps, we'd be out of compliance, and we would actually lose our liability protection in certain cases. And so this is an extra step to make sure that we are not violating laws and that we are not doing anything that would actually expose us to additional liability in a certain part of town. Is that am I right?
I think that's a really good interpretation and a very good fact. I think it's very important that we keep in mind that what we are doing is making certain improvements that are aimed at reducing risk and applying the standards and the guidance that I've cited in the proposal are essential to protecting the town's risk. And so I really appreciate you bringing that up. That's a very important point. You're exactly right.
Yeah. Any further council questions, John? Okay. Howard has his hand up. Go ahead, Howard.
And thank you for that, Paul and Jeff. And everything we do in the right of way, we do some standard as part of risk management. Many things that we do. And then once again, I do want to point out in the schedule that once this is approved, we don't want any long drawn out process here either. We're looking at 20 working days to look at some of the early items, and 2 weeks after that to implement some of the early items. And once again, we are trying to move expeditiously as possible also.
Okay, thank you, Howard. I'm going to go to public comment, and I see, oh wow, we get to see Ed's engineering environment there. He's walking by. I see a couple of hands up. Actually, I think Carolyn has her hand up in two different forms, telephone and computer connection. So I'm not sure which one. Let's try the first one first and see if that works. Go ahead, Caroline. You may need to unmute at your end. And we're not, the one that we brought over is not the phone number one, Carolyn, if you can hear, it's the other one. No, maybe let's switch it and see if the phone number works. Go ahead and unmute, Carolyn. Okay, I just saw it unmute, but I can't hear you.
Does this work?
There we go. Now we can hear you.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. I would like the audience to look at the summary, and I still don't understand why there's a missing piece in that summary. In 2018, the town of Portola Valley allowed a study done by consultant Krupka, and I misquoted in my previous notes at the last meeting, but we had a very, consultant Krupka did present a very extensive study in August 2019, not 2018. And I don't understand why that's not addressed in the summary or mentioned in the summary. Furthermore, I want to tell the audience that the Neely project also used consultants, and right now I believe it's the town of Portola Valley who has paid for this for a study. We don't understand why they chose to do the traffic study during COVID, and even though they then kind of manipulate the study, with data from 19, in our observation, that doesn't equal the amount of traffic that we have currently on Portola Road. So I'm puzzled with your findings. we need to have solutions. Willowbrook is not the only problem. We have problems both on Portola Road, which we have been working on for so many years. We have problems on Alpine Road, and we do study after study. I believe we started in 2012, and nothing gets accomplished. These are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Carolyn. Just to address one element of that briefly, the 2018 study was on a separate issue. It was to do with pedestrian intersections at various locations through town that were not this parking issue. I see Angela Hay has her hand up. Angela, go ahead.
So I can you hear me? I've unmuted.
Yes.
Okay. So thank you very much, Paul, for your proposal. And it'd be great if you can get it done within 20 days, not 20 working days, because we have our next Bpts committee on November the 3rd, which is just 3 weeks away. So that's 21 days. I think you've missed one thing, which is the will of the people. And there's incredible strong will. And I wondered how much that was taken into account in a democracy. If everyone wants something, then you would think the will of the people would also bear into this.
May I ask, Angela, are you addressing me with that question?
No, I think I might. I'm not sure who I'm addressing. I mean, I think the town council is elected by the people, and you know, when nearly everybody on Willowbrook says we want no parking, then that establishes a need to me. That's one of the reasons for a need, is because the people want it. And I think that has to be, I don't know how you rank it. I mean, I've been in marketing where you can rank different responses to a questionnaire, but I think that has some weight. It's not just engineering.
Is that your comment, Angela?
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, I see one more hand up, Betsy Morgenthaler.
Yes, how do you do? Thank you all for bringing this conversation back around again. I've been here for a few other iterations. I want to acknowledge, first of all, and thank Jeff for his questions, because I appreciated hearing that a part of the study would relate to state law and compliance with it for our liability protection. So we're very much aligned in concern for potential liability. I also want to acknowledge that our town was, as I understand it, I wasn't here at the founding, but it was founded on volunteer participation, in part because of the ethic of it, and it brings us together, and also in part as a major cost-saving device. And so since the committees have been so remarkably dedicated, I have such appreciation for the hours of the lifetime of donation here. So I was disappointed then to hear, as I understood him, Mr. Kruka's suggestion that he would be using his own data, not the data collected by the committee. The reason is not strictly related, well, I guess it would be related to cost, because of the painstaking collection of this data over years and years, and importantly, over various seasons. The seasons change things. The weather, the air quality, the green that is sometimes out there, this changes the way that Portola Road is used considerably. So I heard Mr. Krupa, you were kindly saying that you try to get this done quickly and in a limited number of days, but that actually cuts against us. So I would just urge us to make good use of the volunteer committee collected data in doing this. Thank you.
Thank you, Betsy. I see no more hands up from the public, so I will bring it back to the council. Does anybody want to kick us off or have any comment? That was the fake out hand raise. Jeff, go ahead.
So, I mean, I'll just respond to Angela's comment. I mean, we're discussing this because it is important to a lot of people. It doesn't free us from the need to follow the state laws. And this is part of a process that establishes that we are following state laws in something that we believe the public does feel strongly about. So, I mean, it's a little bit of both. Yes, it's the public matters, but we also have to go by the science and the engineering, and in this case, the law. I'm happy to move forward. You know, notwithstanding everything I just said, I do want to move quickly because the committee has put a lot of work into this, for which I'm grateful. I'd like to move forward with this as quickly as is feasible. So,
thank you. Anybody else?
I'll just, I agree with Jeff. I think we need to move ahead, and this looks like a reasonable proposal, given the stakes with legal requirements and liability. And I know that the solution has sort of eluded us for a long time over there by along Portola Road. So it's a good idea to get some very professional insight onto it. And, I'd like to have us move forward.
Thank you, John. Sarah?
Do we just need a motion at this point?
Yeah, I have a couple comments to offer too.
Okay, go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, my comments are, you know, just to address Betsy's point. I think it is probably Paul's intention to use as much of the data that's been collected as he can, and then supplement it with whatever he's required to by law and training and the process that we need to follow to do this the right way. So we're very thankful for all of the work that the volunteers on the committee have put in over the years, as the situation has changed a number of times since 2012, with various attempts at solving it and various underlying shifts in the behavior of the people who are using the parking there. So, you know, we have a lot of data over time. I understand Betsy's point that we don't want to rush and do something in 20 days and not look at the bigger picture and changing seasons and how people use Windy Hill in the winter versus the summer and so forth. On the other hand, you know, in some ways that could argue for not doing anything and spending another year studying this. And I think we've now got enough information about this that we can move forward and make some changes. You know, if we're all lucky and cross our fingers and clap really loudly, maybe this will be the final ultimate solution that makes the parking situation perfect there, but more than likely we'll have to revisit it again after we've made whatever changes we're about to make and make some more incremental changes as the situation continues to evolve. So hopefully this will take us in the right direction. So I'm ready to entertain a motion. You're on.
I'd like to make a motion to approve the proposal by Krupka Consulting.
Is there a second?
I will second that.
So moved by Warnikoff, seconded by Alfs. Sharon, could you call the roll, please?
Councilmember Alves,
Aye.
Councilmember Warnikoff,
Aye.
Councilmember Richards,
Aye.
Vice Mayor Hughes.
Aye. Okay, and with that, we are on to item 16, a recommendation by the Public Works Director with a request for approval of an agreement with Coda Technology Group for installation of audio video equipment to facilitate Zoom meetings back in the historic schoolhouse.
Okay, well, thank you, Vice Mayor Hughes and members of the Town Council. I and the Town Clerk are present here to present this. I also want to mention that we have an AV consultant, Ben Chemio, that's here also to help us on some technical aspects if there's technical questions. We're here to discuss the equipment or the installation of equipment to make the schoolhouse council chambers hybrid Zoom meetings. Some background. Due to the COVID pandemic that started last March, the town moved to a Zoom platform for online meetings, which forced the cities to add technology and equipment that it previously didn't have. This technology allowed the town to continue doing business, which increased flexibility to participate amongst council members, staff, commissioners, and the public also. This, of course, has increased expectations and the desire to have and continue with that flexibility and using Zoom. The town clerk, through the San Mateo County Clerks Network, did some research on what other jurisdictions are doing right now, and found through that network a company called Coda Technologies. The town then reached out to Coda, and many cities are right now rushing to do the exact same thing, since the Zoom room is the platform of choice. So we reached out to go get a proposal on what we needed to do that. And as a background for the schoolhouse and other agencies, many other agencies do have broadcasting capabilities and more advanced displays and projectors, and we don't have that right now. So we're starting at almost like a ground zero, almost. We do have an existing microphone system that was installed a number of years ago. So we understand, staff understood that time was of essence on this. So Coda came out and provided a scope of work and a proposal to integrate our existing mics and to create a Zoom room. Just wanted to mention, unfortunately, Coda could not make it to the meeting tonight, but our AV consultant, Ben, can also assist us on technical items. What is a Zoom room? Well, a Zoom room, it's enabling what's happening in the room to be broadcast out. And what's happening on Zoom to be displayed in the room. So on the hybrid meetings, we would have live audience in the schoolhouse and audience on Zoom. And this would integrate it. This would allow people at home online to view what's in the schoolhouse, and it will allow folks in the schoolhouse to view what's on Zoom. So it would continue to provide remote participation and live for a hybrid meeting to occur and public participation. And getting public comment is really a good point that it will allow. It'll be a nice experience for people to return to. So I do want to refer to the floor plan right now. There was a floor plan in your council packet, and you'll see 5 cameras there. There's a number of cameras in the back and a camera in the front, and those are voice activated and pre-positioned. The more cameras there are, that'll help on lag time. So if you only have one camera, it's trying to move from person to person, and there'll be a lag time. So the number of cameras reflect that. You'll also see a display in front of the dais, and that is for council members looking out to see what's in the Zoom room. So the display would be in front of you, and then there'll be a display on the wall too for the audience to see the rest of the Zoom, and also presentations too. Training, there in the proposal, there is a scheduled trainings, and we see that as training us, the council and the committees, and then whoever decides on staff to then train others as needed. There is a schedule here in the report. Unfortunately, due to the pandemic, concerning equipment, that can take right now some time to order. I think the report here, Coda indicated 2 to 8 weeks to order and receive materials due to the shortages. The work itself could take 2 to 4 weeks. Unfortunately, Coda is booked. They've indicated they picked up a bunch of contracts due to many jurisdictions rushing to do this right now. They are likely booked until the beginning of the year. So scheduling at this point may be an issue due to equipment and timing. In addition, for AV expertise, and it is a sole source, what we did was we called Siegel and Strain, the architects for the town center, to recommend a third-party AV consultant to review the CODA's proposal. He is here today, Ben, and he provided a write-up to me. And in general, Ben indicated that the proposal represented a good value and that the system was generally appropriate for us. There are some, and that's something we needed to do because we are starting with no system at all. And I wanted to determine what we're doing right now is the right step now and into the future. So the consultant also recommended the built-in speakers in the ceiling, which we will explore in the future. And I do have some things to say about that towards the end. Many other council chambers have a better sound system than we do. We have one speaker in the back right now. At the moment, we just added one similar speaker to provide more sound, but the consultant recommends in ceiling built-in speakers. The proposal also, we ran it through the Vice Mayor Craig Hughes also, and thank you very much for looking at the proposal and providing some input on the displays and the rack, and those things were incorporated into the proposal. Concerning fiscal impact, we believe the American Rescue Plan Act could pay for this, and we've budgeted so in the current budget $100,000 to do so. So I and Ben are here for any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Howard. Does council have any questions? Jeff.
So what does this look like? Let's just say that like 3 of us are back in the schoolhouse from the council and 2 are remote for some reason. So there's a big screen on the wall by where the like the screen would have hung, but there's a TV screen on the wall where the old projector screen would have hung. So we can see, any panelists or council members who aren't there. There are cameras pointing at us. So somebody at home sees whoever is remote, but also sees whichever person in the council room is talking, or do they see like the 3 of us who were in the council room at that point, and it's assuming like say if Jeremy's there, we'd all be on the screen, the Zoom screen at the same time, or would it just be whoever's talking?
Howard, would you like me to respond to this?
Yes.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks for the opportunity to answer your questions. The experience for people at home will be like the experience we're having here. It'll be a Zoom experience. And so just as we each have a display of multiple people, a Hollywood Squares rectangle, if you will, then people at home would have that as well so that they could see other participants who have their cameras on, as well as whoever is currently speaking at the dais or whoever is presenting to the council. Allow me to correct one thing, and that is that and I think Howard touched on this, but it all might have gone by quickly. What you at the dais will see is a display that's essentially in the well of the dais or in front of the dais.
Right. Okay.
Okay.
Yes.
And in fact, the floor plan, if it would be useful, I can share the floor plan, or if you have it individually, then I won't.
I do have it. Yeah.
It's page 211.
Thank you. Oh, or that's good too. Okay.
I'll share it there for anybody at home who's following along, but not at the right page of
the. So the confidence monitor, that thing in the middle of the arc of the dais, would display whoever is currently speaking the way you're used to with a Zoom experience, whether it's someone remote. Well, I guess that would be whoever is remote. And if somebody is presenting remotely or presenting within the room, then that would be displayed on that confidence monitor as well.
Okay. And the cameras in the back are just there to kind of show just the general, just the whole room?
Well, not exactly. The camera that you see at the far right behind the dais would be to show the whole room. Often cameras like that are used prior to the beginning of a meeting so that people who are remote can get a sense of people in the room. and as well after a meeting. To contextualize the meeting. The cameras that you see on the left side toward the entrance, those would be controlled automatically by the microphones at the dais. So as a person at the dais starts to speak, a moment later, one of the cameras will point at them. As somebody else at the dais speaks, or a presenter at that lectern speaks, then after a deliberate pause, a camera would show their face. I should also mention that camera on the right side of the room, the camera behind the dais, would also be used to catch the face of the person who is presenting to the council. So the reason and this is an important component of this design that CODA put together. The reason there are multiple cameras rather than just one camera to show the images of the council. Imagine if there were just one camera there, and as a presentation takes place and goes from person to person at the dais, everyone looking at the video would see the camera shifting and panning and panning. And just as we have all experienced in this year and a half or two of excessive Zoom, where somebody's using their phone in their camera in their phone for a presentation, it's a whole lot of motion, and it can get pretty hard to watch.
Nauseating, yes.
So the way the camera system works with the microphone system is that when a person starts to speak, there's a deliberate pause in case maybe that person is just clearing their throat, or somebody tries to interject, but they don't continue because they don't have the floor. But after a brief pause, when somebody new starts to speak, then a camera which has moved to catch their image is turned on. So there would be no flying video images of cameras swooshing back and forth. An image would only be broadcast once that camera has settled into place.
Thank you. That's all very helpful.
Oh, good.
Sarah.
So for the people that are on Zoom, when at home, do they see each council member in a separate box, or whoever is on the panel, whoever there's in person, or is it just the camera capturing the group?
Think of this system as working sort of behind Zoom's back. In a Zoom room, typically you would have a single camera, more or less like what I've got here or you all have at home, a single camera, a single microphone, single display, a single speaker. So what we're doing is behind Zoom's back, we're presenting it with one image at a time from multiple cameras and one voice at a time from multiple microphones. So Zoom just goes about its business sending one person's picture at a time until a new person speaks and is captured by the camera. So it's not a constant Hollywood Squares experience of all of the people at the dais, irrespective of whether they're talking or not.
Okay.
So there'd be one square for each member of the public, but one square for the whole interior of the
Exactly.
schoolhouse.
Right. You could think of the schoolhouse as being one participant, really.
Right. Thank you.
My other question had to do with the timeline. So it looks like on the far end, this is going to be 12 weeks, but then I heard that CODA doesn't have availability until next year. So does that mean the 12 weeks starts when we sign the contract, or when in next year in January?
I'll defer to Howard on that.
Yeah, thank you. So once the contract is signed, our intent is to start ordering the equipment right away. And from then, once we place the equipment order in, CODA would let us know what the reactions from the vendors is going to be. Is it going to be a two weeks or 8 weeks? So the 2 and 8 weeks are completely different than the 2 and 4 weeks of installation. So once we go into contract, the intention is they will order the equipment and determine when it would come in. When it would come in, then the 2 to 4 weeks would then start. So if by chance the best case scenario, vendors say your equipment's coming in at the end of November, then once they've received the equipment and inspected the equipment, calibrated the equipment, they would come in and then schedule installation with the town. of course, barring holidays, 2 to 4 weeks. So to answer your question, the 12 weeks is actually separate. There's a material coming in, there's an actual installation. Now the installation, because due to demand by CODA from many agencies, at this moment, they told us that they're booked out till the first of the year. But they're going to try to squeeze us in when possible.
So
I hope that answers your question.
So the equipment should be here well before the end of the year, unless there's a chip shortage or unforeseen logistics problems nationwide or anything like that. But then the work would probably start January unless somebody cancels or they hire some more people or something before then.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
So realistically, it would be like February before we would be using this in the best case scenario.
And I do want to throw one caveat in there. There is some systems and testing integration also.
And training.
And training. So I think we'll have to, once this goes along, once this rush goes along and things progress, we'll have to provide updates to the town manager, who will then update the town council as to our progress right now, and what the progress will be.
Thank you.
Jeremy, I see your hand is up.
Thank you. And I think, Sarah, building off your set of questions, what, some decisions we need to start to make pretty quickly here is, whether or not, and this is obviously in conjunction with any state guidance or otherwise around COVID, as it relates to beginning some in-person meetings without this equipment. If we're really looking at that long a time frame, I'm fingers crossed that we continue to see a decline in cases and the state continues to loosen things up in ways that everyone feels comfortable with, and we can start holding council, committee, and commission meetings in the schoolhouse. One of the reasons, one of the reasons, not the only reason, that we've been holding off and going into that facility is related to the fact that this has become a real comfort, I think, to residents as it relates to participation. And if we didn't have the technology and able to do that, or we didn't want to force people into making decisions about their health choices and the like. But we might be reaching a point where we want to have a more serious conversation about that. And I would certainly throw it out to the members of the council here if we wanted to agendize that for our next meeting to have a discussion, so the council can provide staff with some direction on next steps. That would be, I think, entirely appropriate.
Yeah, I think this ties into the AB 361 thing that we had on consent as well, which is, we have determined that it's not safe to have meetings right now. That may cease to be the case at some point before the system is actually installed. And at that point, we would have to decide, even though we feel we could meet in person, do we want to meet in person if the public may not feel safe? That even though, we think under 361, we can have the meetings back in the schoolhouse, if this hybrid system isn't in place yet, that would effectively require everybody who wanted to come to a council meeting to come to the schoolhouse. So that's a discussion I think we may want to have if we approve this tonight, and we maybe after executing the contract, we may get a better, more concrete, firm sense of timeline from CODA. I think it's definitely something we might want to agendize and talk about if it becomes an issue, because we can't meet the requirements of AB 361 anymore. Are there other council questions? Whoops, just moved around there. John.
Yeah, I'd like to go back to the feel of the equipment in the room. I really do understand the need for this kind of system and the present sorry state we find ourselves in. And clearly it's necessary for the high level of participation we've had in town. But I'm a little concerned about how it's going to impact that old building. We've got a 75-inch monitor. Is that suspended from the wall? And is it at an angle like that so it comes out from the wall? Is it flat on the wall? And those kinds of questions that I'd hope it could be integrated as carefully into the old building as possible. It probably and obviously won't disappear, but it's going to be a pretty substantial change to a rather quaint old space. Anybody have any feeling?
I don't disagree, but it's to some degree, if I think of it as a schoolhouse, in modern schools, you do tend to have big screens that, we used to have chalkboards back in the old days, and then everybody decided chalk dust was kind of problematic, so they switched to whiteboards, and whiteboards are less interactive, and you can only do certain things, and they have projectors and whatever. And now a lot of classrooms have TVs, so I think we do want to do this in a way that doesn't destroy the old building. But I don't think it's completely out of place. The cameras are tiny, like you'll barely even see them. The big screens are probably the most noticeable change that we're going to have here.
Through the chair, this is almost ancient history at this point, but when we first decided through the council direction to put in some additional equipment into the schoolhouse, you haven't seen the TV, to replace our old rickety cart that had a power or projector on it. We engaged with our town historian Nancy Lund to ensure that we were doing it in a manner that respected the building. I'm sure Howard had his hand up to say what I'm about to say, which is we'll continue to do so. She's been a great resource on that in that regard.
Okay, other council questions? I have a couple. As Howard mentioned, I had seen this proposal before in a slightly different form. They've made some tweaks based on some of my comments. They had spec'd in some very high-end televisions and some other things that we really didn't need, so brought the cost down by a few $1,000s. The questions I have are around, is this a Zoom specific system, or if 5 years from now Zoom is no longer the thing, or they change their protocol or whatever, will this still work for whatever we want to do 5-10 years from now that's not Zoom?
I'm so glad you're asking that question, because none of these video conferencing systems gets to be the king forever. Mm-hmm. And the fortunate answer is that in fact, let's take the microphones for a moment. Your existing microphones are going to be reused. A microphone, for all intents and purposes, is a microphone. The cameras aren't specific to Zoom. What is somewhat specific to Zoom is the programming of a programmable component of this system in order to provide as consistent a user experience for people who are familiar with Zoom as possible. But it's a programmable system. And so if in 6 months or 5 years, you all decide to move to Teams or Meet or something we don't know the name of yet, then I would say worst case, a contractor would have to come in and reprogram that one component.
And that's the Crestron components?
That's exactly right.
So there are two, right? There's the rack mount thing, and then the display panel.
Well,
that's one software system shared between the two.
It's exactly right.
Okay, yeah. So that's a fairly small component of the overall piece here. It's about $2 or $3 grand out of the total, roughly.
I'm not
plus some labor to program it, I guess.
It's the labor that we're talking about. It's not the components. The hardware, that same hardware is in use in other places running Teams meetings right now. That hardware is not specific to a particular platform. It's the program of it, which is. So that's the line item that corresponds.
Okay, great. That was the part I didn't know. All the other stuff with USB and HDMI and all of SDI and all those standards, I'm familiar with all those, but I don't.
You got the acronyms down.
I don't know the AV stuff as much, so I don't know how programmable and interswappable these things are.
Sure.
Protocols. And then there was a mention in the staff report that the consultant had some comment about an extra camera. And I didn't know if that meant that you thought we should have one fewer camera or one more camera.
I haven't had feedback yet from CODA about this. It was my suggestion that they respond to the question of, would there be any impairment of this system if there were one fewer camera? on the entrance side of the schoolhouse, a total of
So where
three
there's
instead of
three,
a total of
reducing that to
4.
two. Yeah, I
Exactly.
had that same thought, which is if those 3 are all pointing at council members and you've got one on while the other one's moving, what's the third one for?
Exactly.
Okay. Okay, so that's an item that is an open question that CODA may respond and say, oh yeah, actually you only need 2.
Exactly.
And then I had one other question as well. Let me see if I can remember it. Actually, that may have been it. I think I was thinking about the switching for those 3 cameras and why you need 3. So that is the same answer you already had. Howard, I see your hand up.
I just also wanted to clarify the camera. That is correct. At this point, CODA made a proposal, and the standard way of doing things, of course, is to have everything designed and bid out. And because we didn't do that, because time of investments, we went straight to the contractor, and to determine the best system. And we could always deduct things, and that's what, once we get into contract, then we can look at, either add or deducts as necessary and recommended.
Okay, thank you. All right, if there are no more questions from the council, I will go to public comment. There are many hands up. First is Rita Comis. Rita, go ahead.
Hi, thank you for taking my questions. I'm wondering if we looked into using the community hall rather than put, I have plaster walls in my home, and it's hard for me to put a nail in the plaster wall, and those beautiful walls at the schoolhouse. It's hard to think about, nails and structures being in those walls and the ceiling. Have we thought about using the community hall and maybe just building a frame structure to put all of those pieces on, and we could meet there? And for people that haven't seen a hybrid system in working, believe the town of Woodside and also the town of Palo Alto. Now the city of Palo Alto is now using it, or you can go to any church in the Bay Area and you will find a hybrid system to look at. And most of these pieces that, the churches are using is just the Samsung screens or whatever screens and the microphones, and they use a consultant. February, we've been waiting a long time to have some type of hybrid meeting to be able to see how many attendees are in a particular meeting. There are some real big issues that are going on in town, and it would be just nice to see each other. It was nice to see some people at the town picnic, at Zot the Tots, seeing people outside, but we've got some important issues that are going on, and it would just be really nice to see each other before February, to deal with these big issues, because there is a way, and other people are doing it, and I think Portola Valley is pretty smart. We have to find a way, and then not just be stuck on one person to give us a call back. Thank you.
Thank you, Rita. You had a couple questions there, and I'm going to take other public comment, and then staff will go through and answer whatever's appropriate at the end. So not ignoring your questions, we'll come back to them. Next hand up is Angela Hay.
Yeah, I think $18,000 for a 30 times zoom camera seems an awful lot. I'm not sure that in a small place like the schoolhouse, you need 30 times zoom. It just seems a very expensive camera, $18,000. And I'm not sure that the rack is the most convenient. Just based on what Rita was saying, we're running hybrid at Christchurch, and I know you want something more professional of this, but it's basically on my iPhone and my laptop. And I have a volunteer with an iPhone who can point it at the right place and do it on a laptop. And that costs next to nothing. And we're doing it to YouTube as well. So, I was thinking you could have 5 used iPhones with directional microphones, which would be a whole lot less than having a camera that moved. And, as for the ceiling rack mount, I'm not sure that we don't have one at home. And so my question is, you know, is there a company that's gone bust that has equipment already that you could pick up? It just seems excessively expensive for what you could do.
Thank you, Angela. Next hand up is Liz Babb. Go ahead, Liz.
Yeah, it takes a minute, just so you know, Craig, for that unmute to come up.
Yep.
Okay, so question for Ben, probably. I think it's been repeated many meetings that people want to see who's on Zoom, right? So my question is, if you're attending the meeting in person, will you be able to see how many attendees are on Zoom? And then people want to, second question, people want to know when they're on Zoom, they want to know who's in the room. So I was a little confused when you talked about how basically the schoolhouse would be one Hollywood Square. Would people on Zoom be able to see how many people were in person in the audience? And then my third question is, this cannot, this is low-hanging fruit for a lot of tech companies out there. And is there an opportunity to simply go to somebody other than Coda to get this done more quickly? Thank you.
Thank you, Liz. Next hand is Carolyn Vertonghen. Carolyn, go ahead. You may need to unmute, Carolyn. And it looks like the hand went up on not your phone number. It's the other one. So I'm not sure if we may have the wrong one. Okay, Carolyn, we're going to move you back to attendees. If you still have a question, perhaps you could raise your hand on your phone number and we'll try that. And if not, we will try David Cardinal.
Hi. First of all, I've done a lot of AV design work, and I think overall it's a great proposal. As to the cameras, well, there's 6 $3,000 cameras. That's what they cost. And one reason they cost that is because they're in the back of the room and they zoom and pivot really quickly, that particular model. They're just expensive cameras, and maybe 5 is okay. I think all that's great. My other comment was, if you need to get started sooner because the supply chains are all screwed up, we've been doing a lot of hybrid stuff at Stanford with meeting owls, where you could put one of those up on a dais with the 6 people, and it could give a panorama of them and record them. And that might meet the minimum requirements of a hybrid meeting, at least to get you through some amount of time until you can get all this other gear bought and installed. But I think it's the kind of gear we should have as a town, assuming we have the money, which we seem to. So thanks.
Okay, thank you, David. Next hand up is Betsy.
Yeah, thank you. I am also very interested in hearing and separating really the intended, what is intended from the unintended consequences here. And I'm basing my comments on both what was in the staff report. There was one sentence that under this hybrid meeting model, council members of the public and staff would have the option of the council members, public and staff would have the option to participate in person or at the schoolhouse or at home virtually. And that the schoolhouse would join as one participant essentially. So then basing this next comment was thank you to consultant Ben Shemuel, that you began by saying the experience for people at home will be as you see it here. And as I see it here, I'm responding to. And then you also said later that there would be 1 square for each member of the public. So I was having a hard time reconciling that because I don't see any members of the public. I only know what members of the public are there. Those who choose to speak and also actually use their last name, because some people have common first names. Will there be, therefore, so to try to reconcile this, was there an intention expressed on the front end that we try to relate to what we lost with the COVID quarantine, which is ready access to the faces? You can always come in dark glasses and a hat, but more or less relate to the faces who are present and know one another, because we're such a small town. And have you worked with other clients that have had that desire, and can you make it possible? The other one was really related to the council members, and it's really about establishing critical mass. I don't want to run into the Gertrude Stein problem is that, her comment about Oakland, which was there was no there. I don't think she'd say that today, but I do hope that the schoolhouse, that there will be a real palpable presence, that it would be a rarity that you would opt not to go there, apart from, more serious health consequences. Thank you. I look forward to hearing this, and just want to register. I really look forward to getting back together in person for the warmth. Thank you.
Thank you, Betsy. Hand up next from Christy Corley.
Yes, thank you so much. This is really important to me. The sooner the better that we get to meet in person. At this time, we can go into grocery stores, restaurants with our masks. It should be our choice whether we want to gather. So those that want to gather should be able to gather. And we care about our community. We care about talking with each other after the meeting. I do remember sitting on the floor once. We have some big projects coming up, and I would hope that our residents can be comfortable during longer meetings. I know you're uncomfortable, but I've been on the floor before, and I would hope that we could consider using the larger room. And I would like to see everyone's faces if I was away and needed to be on Zoom. If I'm in town, I would like to be able to walk in the room with a mask. We noticed that the proposal says May 24th, so I'm really surprised 4 months later, we're still working on it. And now we're delayed with equipment. That's surprising and disappointing. And please put the residents gathering as a priority. Thank you.
Thank you, Christy. I do not see another hand up. I do see Carolyn Vertonghen's phone number is still on the attendees list. So Carolyn, last chance if you put your hand up. If not, we'd be happy to take your comments by email. Nope, not seeing the hand go up. So I see Jeremy, your hand has gone up. Go ahead.
Yeah, through the chair, I wanted to address a couple of the comments. The conversation, at least at the staff level, wasn't an either or related to which of the two facilities. It was always both, and how to use the monies that were made available through the American Rescue Plan Act in the best fashion over the next couple of years. So the focus in this round was for the historic schoolhouse. The next round will be for the community hall. So all of our facilities that we use for public meetings would be made available. But there's been no direction from the council, nor would I expect there to be any direction from the council or any of our other bodies to regularly use the community hall for our more intimate gatherings. To one other question that came up about the delay was actually primarily related to the consultant asking for time to make sure that their system was working. So it was not a staff related delay. Woodside was the first city in San Mateo County to do this, and they wanted to make sure everything worked. We actually were involved in helping ensure that it was working with visits to that, to their facility, and beta testing it. So that's why we are where we are now. Thank you.
Thank you. And Howard, I see your hand is up also.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor, Vice Mayor. Concerning the community hall, I think right now we're trying to get the schoolhouse up and running. I think that with the pandemic, we may need to look at a long range improvements of the schoolhouse, with speakers. And also, as the town manager indicated, the community hall sometimes is used as council chambers and committee and commission larger meetings too. And that's something that we're going to have to look at in the future and plan for. So that's something that we should think about in the long term. And at that time, we won't be in such a rush as we utilize some consulting to determine what's correct for the community hall and think those things through. There also was a comment concerning the schoolhouse and how we're going to do this and making sure we keep it quaint. And that's always one of the top things, keeping the rural character of the town and keeping things quaint and nice. We for the cameras, we are fishing the lines in the walls. We're not using any wire molding or on the wall conduits to do that. So that's something that we are conscious of. Concerning, there was a question concerning CODA's cost and maybe looking at other consultants. The concern now is, time is of essence. We got CODA because they worked for many jurisdictions, and at the time, we saw studies that jurisdictions did looking at solutions and costs from other AV consultants, and it looked like CODA was low and had the best proposal in the ones that we saw. So I hope that answers that. And that's why we also did get a consultant, an AV consultant, to peer review this to make sure we are getting a value and we are getting the right thing. Thank you.
Thank you, Howard. I also had one response to the question of cost. So I did look at this and looked at options for different cameras. These cameras they're only 1080p. They're not 4K or anything sort of futuristic, and they need a high zoom level to some degree because of that lower resolution and the distance from where they're going to be. There are cheaper cameras out there that are PTZ cameras that have roughly the same specs, some of them considerably cheaper. But the CODA representative that I talked to, I believe was maybe been the president or CEO of the company, convinced me that using the same equipment that they're used to using on other projects that they're familiar with, they know how to maintain, they know how to program, they know its performance, they know how reliable it is, and so on, is the better path here, rather than saving another $1,000 or something on the cameras and then having to eat it because the cameras don't work or they don't configure them properly or they move jerkily and it doesn't perform the way that CODA is expecting it to perform. I think that in considering this system, we have to think not just about the installation, but the maintenance and updating of it over the coming, hopefully, decade or so, that I would hope would be the minimum life that the system is actually useful for. So that was an important component. And while they did knock down the price of the TV, because a Samsung TV is pretty much the same as a Panasonic TV, and they swapped those out, they swapped the server rack, they swapped a couple other pieces of equipment that I thought, there were perfectly equivalent systems that wouldn't create a maintenance burden. Some of these more specific components, I think it is a good idea to go with what the manufacturer, the installer, is recommending, just so that they can maintain it and guarantee that it will work reliably. Okay, is there any further discussion from the council? Any thoughts or motion anybody would like to make on this item?
Looks like Howard has his hand up.
Yep, Howard, I see your hand's going back up. You're on mute, Howard.
I wanted to mention in the report, there was an additional optional service level agreement that was pretty costly. At this point, we are opting not to take it right now. We could change our minds later on, depending on what support that we need. And I also do want to point out there on the recommendations, there are 2 recommendations there. Thank you.
Yes, I see there are 2 recommendations on the first page of the staff report. So discussion, anybody have any thoughts or discussion? I had one question on the additional speakers that might be ceiling mounted. Would we ask CODA to do that as part of this project, or go with what their proposal is and then potentially in the future add those? And if so, what is the capacity of this system for adding things like extra sets of speakers? I imagine you can kind of do what I think of as sort of just splitting the wire, because these are amplified speakers, right? That's not a central amp. The amp is in the speaker, so you just get another.
They're conventional loudspeakers, just like the one in your living room. They're not amplified.
I didn't see it.
Howard, may I address this?
Yes, sorry.
Okay. Let's see. As to the amplifier, I'd have to find that in the proposal. Without finding it, I suspect that it would be that the amplifier provided in the proposal would be sufficient for using for the ceiling speakers. They tend to be fairly equivalent. Let me take just a moment to speak to the benefit of the ceiling speakers, and that is that the objective with a sound system is that everyone in the audience hear the same level and quality of sound. And when you have a single loudspeaker at one end of a room, then people close hear louder sound and better sound than people further away. If you have loudspeakers at opposite ends of the room, that's somewhat mitigated, but it's still the case. The most essentially democratic way of providing an equal sound level to everyone in a space is ceiling speakers, which is why we see them in so many utilizations. So that's the reason that I advocate for them.
Thank you. Yeah, we've had commentary in the past from members of the public when we have people talking on a microphone, and some people can hear them and some can't. So
right.
We definitely have that problem today.
Sure.
Howard, yes. Go ahead, Howard.
I just wanted to add the second part of your question concerning if we're going to do it or not. At this point, it was not included in the quote. The speaker we have in the back of the room now was to facilitate people in the back of the room hearing the council members. It was a very minimal system, and then CODA recommended just a minimalist system of adding a speaker in the front. I do agree with Ben after he reviewed it on the speaker system, but we haven't gotten a cost yet, and so that's what the contingency is for at this moment. Is to the next step would be to request CODA to come up with some kind of design or some kind of speaker system, and to analyze what that cost is going to be, whether we have to come back to the council or not. But that is quite, a number of speakers recessed into the ceiling is delicate work that we do, but it's something that's not included in the proposal. But our intent was to go into contract first, and then start talking about ads. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Sarah, what are your thoughts?
I am comfortable with this as it's laid out and would be ready to make a motion to approve both of the recommendations.
Okay, Jeff?
Yeah, I will second that motion. I was sort of thinking about, is this the best way to spend part of the relief money we're getting? But then, the timeline of when we actually get into the schoolhouse, we still need to figure out exactly. But this is something like this is part of our future. There's no getting around it. I was thinking maybe we wait on it or something. But the fact is, people really appreciate the fact that they can watch these things from home, even if we are back in the room. And so we need this or some version of it. And this looks like a good solution. And I just, based on my limited experience with other systems, it seems like the proposal is in line with what I've seen elsewhere. So I'm comfortable moving forward as well.
Thank you, John.
Yeah, let's move ahead.
Okay. Yeah, my thoughts and comments on this are I'm supportive of it. We had already put $100,000 in the budget for this, and it came in at 2/3 of that. So we're well under what we had budgeted. Obviously, there's a contingency in the ceiling speakers and whatever, so maybe a little closer to the 100 grand, but 32 seems like a lot to install a couple speakers in the ceiling. So I think hopefully we should be able to get that in. And I think, Jeff, to your point, I think this goes beyond the pandemic. I think there are not a lot, but some silver linings to this pandemic. And one of them, I think, is that we have all learned that while there are definite downsides to only being able to do it, the option to be able to meet remotely and interact remotely in ways that we rarely used to do has enabled a lot of things that were much more difficult before. And I think, especially in the democratic process, we've seen, as we've had a number of very difficult issues come up over the last several years, massively more people involved in our meetings and our committee meetings than I've seen in the 15 years before that I've been involved in activities in town. So I think allowing people the option of continuing to have that flexibility while moving back to the old collegial atmosphere of hanging out in the old schoolhouse in the little room and being able to see each other face to face. This system hopefully will allow us to provide the best of both worlds. And as the pandemic abates, hopefully we'll have everybody in the schoolhouse and maybe one or two members calling in. But if we continue to have 40 or 50 because it's more convenient for them than to come down to the schoolhouse, I wouldn't want to discourage those people from participating in our meetings. So I think it's a good overall solution.
And to Betsy's point, I told the council earlier, I'm lying on my back because I injured my back earlier today, which is why I apologize if I look particularly casual or frumpy about this, but it's the least painful way for me to be here tonight.
If we didn't have a hybrid meeting, you might
I
not have
wouldn't
been
be
able to attend
there.
at all.
Yeah.
So that's the sort of thing that we might be able to do in the future. Okay, so we have a motion that's been made by Councilmember Wernickehoff and seconded by Alfs. If there is no further discussion, then Sharon, can you please call the roll?
Councilmember Alfs.
Aye.
Councilmember Wernickehoff.
Aye.
Councilmember Richards.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Hughes.
Aye. And that was one covering both of your requests, I think, Howard, so you should be all set.
Thank you.
Okay, and that brings us to Council Liaison Committee and Regional Agency reports. And I'm going to go in the order that your Hollywood squares on my screen. Sarah.
Let's see. All of my work had to do with meetings that are coming up. They were prep meetings. Tomorrow we have the Housing Element Town meeting, which is the open meeting to the town. Doing prep work for that meeting. And really, as I think Jeff mentioned earlier, for clarification, that meeting is really, or maybe it was you, Jeremy, is really to kind of give a one-on-one of what the housing element is and what our approach is. So we have that coming up. And so my work was just preparing for that. And then another prep work was we have a community meeting with the Sequoias that Jeremy and I are going to be running next week, but I don't think any of my actual liaison groups met for meetings in the meantime. So that's it for me tonight.
Okay, thank you. Jeff.
Okay. Let's see. ASCC had a follow-up meeting. There was a project on Grove that the ASCC ended up wanting to have a site visit just to follow up on the because there was some concern about the story poles not being and some of the plans not being shared soon enough. So they had the follow-up meeting 2 weeks ago, and it went smoothly. And I think everyone it actually helped to be out on site and see kind of the separation between the two properties in question. So I thought it was a very productive meeting. I think everyone came away from it kind of their concerns met. So that turned out well. Let's see, the last planning commission meeting, John actually filled in for me because I was I had a conflict. I was at the airport roundtable meeting. This is last Wednesday, and let's see, I guess the one interesting thing that came up, well, airport traffic is sort of slowly edging back towards sort of pre-pandemic levels. It had been probably 20 or 30% of where it was. It's edging back up to 50 or 55%. So some of the noise questions that have always been there are sort of creeping back into consideration from the public. One interesting thing is there's a proposal from the malls at Tanforan in San Mateo, or there's a proposal to redevelop them into housing, which is a big problem because they actually sit right at the end of runway 10 right, meaning that they're well within kind of there's a sizable area where it's just too loud to have housing underneath them. And so for some reason, I mean, they're pursuing this, and the airport director was sort of adamant this just isn't going to work. And I'm surprised that it got as far as it did, given that it's just very obviously sits within this area that's sort of not allowed. But other than that, kind of the same things that are going on there. The roundtable is debating whether to allow other jurisdictions to join, and in particular Palo Alto has been interested in joining for some time. I support that, and Menlo Park in particular supports it, just because we think they share a lot of our same issues here in terms of arrival noise. There's been some reluctance from the northern part of the county who want to focus on takeoff noise, but there is a group formed. They are in fact moving. They're going to start talking about the logistics of opening membership to other groups. So hopefully we'll have some answers to that early next year. So that was the roundtable. Sorry, I'm just going through notes to make sure I get everything. Let's see, wildfire prep met last Tuesday. Let's see, obviously we've now negotiated our move from a ad hoc to a standing committee. We had let's see, sorry, I'm just going through the notes to make sure I remember what so we talked a little more about, so in a previous meeting, we had a private company come in and talk about their services for basically performing mitigation assessments. So basically going door to door almost, and assessing properties, and having basically helping people get the fixes they need to make their properties more fire safe. So we discussed further how to work with those companies in terms of, we can't endorse companies, but we might be able to sort of go out and vet individual companies. And what I think we're going to do now is pull together the subcommittee, the home hardening subcommittee, and work with staff on basically how to come up with some way to sort of come up with vendors that we actually think are worthwhile to work with, and also give people the option of doing it themselves, because the fire marshal has kind of what's basically a checklist. So you can do it yourself, or you could contract with several companies now that can come out and actually sort of help you with it, depending on what your capabilities and preferences and time availability are. That was probably the biggest thing that came out of fire committee.
Jeff, I don't know if you wanted to mention the discussion of revenue around resources.
Oh, yeah. Yes. Sorry. Thank you. The other question that came up was sources of revenue, additional revenue sources that we could consider in terms of to direct towards fire preparedness townwide. The things that came up were we could adjust the utility users tax. We've historically lowered it from the maximum. We've lowered it from 5.5% to 4.5%. We could raise that, and that would provide a little extra revenue. I think it was something like $30,000 to $40,000 a year.
I think it's about 100. My back of my head, I think of it as 100,000 per percent. So.
Oh, maybe it's okay. It was more. I'm trying to remember.
Yeah, I think about 400K. Right. We get about 400K for our 4%.
Yeah, you're right. It was 100K. Somebody was thinking it was 300, which I thought was high, but so 100 is probably more in the ballpark. There was that idea. There was some more discussion about using open space funds for maintenance, at least the UUT part of the open space funds, which obviously would need more discussion. We even talked a little bit about things like a parcel tax, which obviously has a lot of complications and would take some efforts, or a bond issue. We could issue a bond. So there were just various ideas. The idea of just getting how could we find some more money to do some more firework quickly in town? And so I think that's a continuing discussion among them that might eventually find its way to us. But it probably, I mean, any of the things we're talking about would be fairly complicated, require some work on our part. So, you know, I imagine there'll be a few more back and forth. Anything I'm missing on that discussion, Jeremy? I think that's
You got it.
kind of the gist of it. Okay, so that's the big things from fire safety. Parks and Rec, they have moved their meetings, I believe, now to Thursdays. And I think the 2 times they've picked, might have a conflict, so I might need to figure out. Might require, well, be nice to get some. Nice to have somebody at their meetings, but maybe in January we have to think about reapportioning jobs. Just because they're meeting on Thursdays, and I have a standing conflict with one of my PCE meetings on Thursdays, so I have not been able to work with them directly. But their big thing was they were pulling together the Zostatats and the town picnic, which, as you know, and the PV Live Revive with cultural arts, all of which I was there for a while. I don't know if anyone else made it out there, but they were all just it was a pretty amazing day out there. So I did a little bit of work with Patty and John from the Parks and Rec. They did a great job, and the race, I think the race went off well. The road was closed for a shorter period of time than they were anticipating, so I think they're happy with that. The logistics of that also, I thought, that were handled really well, and I've been hearing good comments about just how it was organized and that they managed to pull it off. So that was good news, and it was good to see people back out on the town center again, kind of having a good time on a Saturday. Other than that, I have a nature and science meeting tomorrow. Paul Heipel did his Gall talk. I wasn't able to attend, but I think they got some pretty good. I think they got good turnout for that as well. So I think they're going to take a little break from these webinars, Zoom meetings they've been doing, but I think they want to take a little break and then get back to some more things. Because I think, like everything we've put on Zoom lately, I think they've just been very well received. I think there's a lot of people wanting to kind of see more stuff out there. So I think that's everything I have for this round.
Do you know who the alt is, Jeff, for Parks? Sarah?
I think it's
Is it
me.
you?
Okay.
Yeah.
We do Thursdays through the end of the year if Jeff can't make it, and then we can just wait until our regular January reshuffle.
Yeah, what time on Thursdays is it?
7, I think.
7 p.m.
Yeah, I'll follow up with you offline.
Okay.
They changed it, and I've been.
If it's not going to work out, then let Marianne and me know, and we'll figure something.
All right.
And if not, if we can just wait till January, let's just wait till January, because that's easy. We're going to reshuffle anyway.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. John.
Okay, let's see. Starting off with, we had a conservation committee meeting that have some new materials to talk about understory development and coordination with fire safety. Let's see. There's some more rodenticides lecture coming up. I believe that's been postponed for a while. And they did have a table at the Live Revive event that was pretty well attended. Planning Commission meeting that I set in for Jeff, that was the, let's see, there were 3 items. Map modification on Grove Drive that was fairly straightforward, involved ground movement potential map modification. The thing that kind of stood out was that this was in conjunction with a project that had already gone through Ascc, and under our regulations and the way we've sort of developed the priorities of the different groups of the Ascc and Planning Commission, it means that they have to go through the entire review again at Planning Commission, which seems like we're kind of wasting some time. So having the Planning Commission review the entire design, colors, have the it's all presented as by the applicant all over again, and it just seems like we could streamline that a bit. Third item was an undergrounding exception request on Crescent. That brought up some pretty lively discussion about whether or not the group should be, planning commission should be making the decision based on cost, which has become more and more common. And I think that's it's something that'll have to be thought about at probably another level. What the real intent of that is, it's a quite a bigger discussion, I think, especially given the issues of fire safety and undergrounding, trying to get to a point where we can underground more of the town's electrical system.
Yeah, I think we budgeted for this year to do a study of undergrounding potential in town. So maybe coming out of that, maybe we'll have a discussion.
Then I had emergency prep. Let's see, fire department report. Talked about, this was just before the beginning of the San Mateo County vaccination site startup, which is now in, I guess it's being offered. Comment was made that firefighters are not required to be vaccinated, but over 90% of our Woodside Fire group is vaccinated, which is good. They've had a new battalion chief promoted, William Hurd, I believe his name is, and 4 to 5 captain promotions coming up, which is a big number. They're pretty excited about that. Statewide fire report that things are calming down a bit, but there's still 10 major fires in the state and all on federal land. Let's see, there's a having I guess the relocation of our radio equipment to the Cal Water site is up in the air a bit now, because apparently they've had some retirements at Cal Water, and the people who knew what was going on have left, and everyone has to relearn their roles apparently. So, not very surprising, I guess. I think that was about it. The emergency preparedness, then an Ascc meeting on Monday, which involved a review of the Neely Winery physical items on the list, the changes that they're talking about making to fencing and parking and some signage. Did a pretty good job of keeping the discussion focused on that rather than on the bigger picture that will be reviewed by the planning commission. But even so, they had, I think, 18 people comment in the public comment period. Primarily people speaking out not in favor of the whole process. And then there was the Ascc did pass or did recommend that the planning commission move ahead with their blessing on the physical aspects of the project. Then there's a review of a project on Westridge that had some issues with the location of some redwood trees, a generator that there's some question about how the process was handled both by the applicant and by the town. It seems to me that it was the town picked up some potential errors up by the applicant, and the applicant was not happy about it. But the Ascc went through the process and ended up approving a 2-to-1 vote. They were short, they had only 3 members there. And let's see, I think that was it. That's all the 3 I had.
Okay, thanks. I had two, the Woodside Highlands Road Maintenance District Resident Advisory Committee. They mostly were wrapping up, well, they have wrapped up, but they were doing a final accounting and so on their paving project, which was quite successful eventually. Some discussions of all the usual stuff on the street, tree limbs, rock walls, road cleanup days, so forth. So they're proceeding well, and I think that they've settled into a good pattern of what the committee handles and what they have their, whatever they call it, the Woodside Highlands, I forget what it's called, Residents Fun Club, or I don't know.
Improvement Association.
That one, yes. And I think that's landed in a good place, as we hoped it would. And hopefully we'll continue that way. And then BPTS, obviously we heard about the Portola Road stuff earlier tonight. Let's see, what else did we have? There was the ranch came, they wanted a new speed limit sign. There's one in one direction, but not the other direction on a section of road. So that was fine. Discussion of the housing element process and BPTS's role in that. Neely wine proposal, traffic analysis of that. And then planning for Zots to Tots. And that was largely around organizing volunteers for the road closure to stand at each intersection, stop people from going into the closed road and explaining to them why. So that, as I hear, went very successfully in the end. And there were a handful of people, I think, who got stuck in the Windy Hill parking lot, who got there early in the morning and went hiking, came back to their cars and found they couldn't leave the parking lot. But in the end, I think everybody was okay. So the event, I think, went off very well. So a successful Zots and picnic. And that was all I had. And I am going to deviate from what we have been doing and ask if there's any public comment on any of the council liaison committee regional agency reports. Any public comment? I do not see any public comment. So over to Jeremy for the town manager report.
Thank you. And I think maybe for the first time in 5.5 years, I have no report.
Okay. And public comment on Jeremy's no report? Seeing none, I will come to Council Digest, item 19, September 23rd. Anybody? No. September 30th, item 20. No. Item 21, October 7th. Nope. Is there any public comment on any of the town council digests? Seeing none, is there a motion to adjourn?
So move.
All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you all. Long meeting. Good to have the gavel again. Such a great feeling of power. No,
I won't speculate on the correlation between long meetings and Craig being in charge.
and I promised Sarah I'd keep them as short as I could.
Believe me, I've been thinking that for the last 4.5 hours.
All right. Good night, everybody.
Okay. Good night, everyone. Bye.